Hey, wow. I guess we're starting early today. That button got pushed preemptively. So, yeah, gotta love these sensitive new iPhones. So here I am, preemptively talking to you all. Um, yeah, was intending to start about 6 minutes from now, but here we are, ready to talk, ready to talk. Yeah, what an evening. Hope you all are doing well. Um, yeah, so I guess we want to wait a little bit. We want to wait a little bit for people to come join us because they were anticipating us starting roughly 6 or 7 minutes from now. So we're kind of doing a pre-game show, if you will. Um, Now, people are asking about the unnamed diet beverage. I see Adam M asking about that. I haven't drank one in at least a week. I have not had any unnamed diet beverage, and I'm trying to go for a record. Right, tomorrow, Friday, will be the anniversary, the 1 week anniversary of me drinking diet soda. I'm working from home. I haven't really left the house. On Saturday, I did go grocery shopping with my wife on Saturday to make sure we were stocked up on food for our quarantine situation. But since then, I will tell you, I have not had any diet beverage, and I have plenty of it. And I have heard rumors that there might be a shortage of diet beverage. So if that happens, I'm saving up because I've got quite a bit of it here at the apartment, but I haven't had any of it. And I'm working from home, so I don't really need to caffeinate as much. It's not like I have to, get up and get on the subway and get to the office. Instead, I'm just kind of working from home. So, I don't need it as much. So I'm trying to really kind of get over my dependency, right? I figure why not do better? Now, things may change. There may be a situation where I just have to crack one open and pour it in with ice, and I miss it, right? I miss that rush. But honestly, the diet soda is part of that whole go out into the world, go get them lifestyle. And when you have a lifestyle of quarantine, when you're at home, just kind of sitting around the Brooklyn apartment, minding your own business, you don't really need that go get 'em energy like you might sometimes. So I'm kind of taking pride in my 1 week abstinence from unnamed diet beverage. So there you go. But folks, I've been doing a lot of YouTube work this week, right? I mean, I've been doing my reporting, from my apartment. Basically, I've been doing Skype reports for my job, and I had a great conversation with Brenton Langle. I don't know if folks saw it, about science fiction and fantasy and the politics of sci-fi and fantasy. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. Plus, I've got two debates coming up. The first debate that's coming up is with a Trotskyist. I'm going to be debating an actual Trotskyist. And what more, I'm going to be debating an actual self proclaimed fascist, both obviously via Skype. So keep in mind. Now, I'm not going to give away the names of who the Trot and who the fascist are. They both embrace the term. The Trot is a self proclaimed Trot. The fascist is a self-proclaimed fascist. And I think that they're going to be good debates. I'm quite excited about these debates that are coming up, but don't want to give away about them. But yeah, and I'm sure some people, I see KJ Mack is saying, but you're platforming them. I'm sure there are some people that won't approve of me doing that. I got a huge amount of flack for debating Augustus Sol Invictus. I don't know if folks remember that. And what's weird is that debate is still up online. And I think, I wish that it had been filmed differently. I think if I could do it over again, I would have used a different filmmaker to record the event. But the audience that was there was great. The audience participation was pretty good. And a lot of things about that debate were spectacular. And I thought that I kind of destroyed Augustus Sol Invictus and his far right ideology and his fascism. I thought I kind of just ripped it to shreds. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. And one person who really liked that debate, to my surprise, didn't see it coming at all, was Julian Assange. And part of the reason that debate got so much play, I'm trying to get you so you're more stable here. I don't want this to be shaken around like it is. But yeah, Julian Assange actually tweeted out the debate to his followers. And that was pretty amazing. So there you go. But yeah, I mean, I look forward to debating this Trotskyist. And I look forward to debating this fascist. I hope it's a important conversation. And sometimes in debates, you can get facts and details across that you wouldn't get across in like a lecture conversation, right? You can get to real questions and differences. It's a different style. And I like the debate style. I'm sorry we're shaking so much. But folks, now is the time. It's not exactly 8 o'clock yet, but now is the time to hit the like button if you haven't already done it. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done it, and be absolutely, positively sure to hit the notifications bell. Be absolutely sure to hit the notifications bell. Be positively sure you've hit that, because I know a lot of people are not getting the notifications for these lives and have told me as much. They said, hey, I wanted to see your live. I had to catch it afterwards because I didn't get the notification. So if you've already hit the notifications bell, hit it again. Make sure that you're signed up for notifications, because a lot of people are not getting them. It kind of unnotifies people. It unsubscribes people. YouTube is very weird like that. YouTube is very, very strange in how it operates. There's the algorithms. People want to read something more sinister into that. But, it is what it is. I mean, we just have to live with it, right? And who knows? I mean, the rules, right, about who gets deplatformed, who gets shut down, are very, very random. There's no clear guidelines. It's very much up to whoever is behind the desk, which techie is behind the desk that day, that moment, and decides to let you go or not. And it's very, very weird. It's very strange. And there's a lot of strange stuff happening on social media. YouTube sent out this notification to everybody saying that they would probably be taking down content that didn't violate their terms of service, and they apologize preemptively, but it's due to the coronavirus situation, and they apologize. Oh, okay, that's nice. Facebook has been censoring people like crazy, though some people haven't been touched, right? There's weird stuff going on. The tech overlords, right? The tech giants, the tech overlords, they are using this moment to really kind of push an agenda, as are many different forces. And we're going to get into that. A lot of different forces are using this whole COVID-19 situation to push their own agenda. And I think, if anything, the only thing that's keeping us safe right now is the fact that there's competing agendas. Among the ruling class, there's not a clear consensus about what they want to do. So, folks, as we're getting ready to get started here, since we accidentally started early, not our intention, why don't we? I mean, I guess I should hold off a little bit before we do the roll call thing. But why don't I make clear that I do appreciate super chats? So if you want to throw me a super chat, I have a pen and paper in front of me, and I promise you, if you send me a super chat, I will give you a response. I will try to respond to other things in the chat as well. But if you super chat me, if you send me a super chat, I can guarantee you I will talk about it. And I may not give you the response that you want, but I will give you some kind of response if you send me a super chat. I will write it down if I'm in the middle of something. If not, I will address it immediately. So there you go. So folks, while we're waiting to fully get started here, while we're waiting to really fully launch, why don't folks tell me what they would like me to talk about today? Give me some suggestions. I do have some content that we want to get to, but if there's any suggestions, you folks that are here, you early birds that get the worm, you squeaky wheels that get the grease, now is your time. Now is your time to tell me what you want me to talk about. I see Venezuela, and I've already got that on the agenda. That will be discussed. Have no fear. Have no fear. Liam Hicks. Hey, I'm from the CPUSA. Is there going to be a CPI conference for all communist organizations? All right. Well, I'll just get to that right now, since we're going here. I'm glad you're part of, CPUSA. I'm not in that particular organization. Oh, wow. Old sci-fi movie money. Thanks, says Matthew Jones. Well, I appreciate that. Oh, Colm sends me $5. Well, there you go. What did NZ New Zealand say? It went by fast. Can someone do the NZ one again? Because I want to make sure I get to that. But I'll talk about the CPI conference as well. Um, what was the one that just went by? Uh, Thoughts on JFK? Okay, all right. So JFK conspiracy, JFK, right? CPI conference. Um, Okay. Um, what did NZ ask me about? Someone named NZ sent me a super chat and it went by, and I want to NZ. I want to answer it. It's a New Zealand super chat. How is the capitalist stock market from? Oh, okay, very good. All right, capitalist stock market versus China. Okay, so why don't we get right to these super chats? First of all, the CPI conference, and thank you, Chess Rook, for the super chat. I do appreciate it, and thanks for everyone. Thanks to everyone for pitching in and all of that. Lady Ravenhair, a good friend of mine out in New Jersey, is talking about 5G. I think that's an interesting topic. We might be able to get to that later. Okay, so the CPI conference. Now, it was supposed to happen on April 18th, and we had a great hotel rented out in Weehawken, New Jersey. Just a great, great hotel facing the river, Lincoln Harbor, just a beautiful hotel. However, obviously, with the situation as it is, New York City, New Jersey, pandemic, people can't go outside. Um, Obviously, we can't have it. Now, the hotel has been very friendly, very, very accommodating. And once things turn back on, we're going to pick a new date for the CPI conference, and we'll start promoting it again, and we'll have it. I fully intend to go forward with forming this Center for Political Innovation, a think tank that will develop policy and promote socialist ideas and conduct socialist education. And someone said they're from the CPUSA and they want to attend. Great, fine. If someone says WWP or PSL or ISO or anybody's welcome, right? Right. If people are disrupting, we will have quite a bit of security there because we don't want there to be an issue. So we're going to have security on hand. But anybody, hey, people are welcome. But it is certainly not tied to any party. I know people that are in CPUSA. I know people that are in many of those different parties. And there are many folks that were in the Socialist Party or currently in the Socialist Party, folks that are in different groups plan to attend, and no one's barred, everyone's invited. It's not put on by one of those groups. And I think that happens. That's one thing that's always kind of bothered me on the left is that immediately when any new group comes and forms on the left, immediately everyone says, "Who are you?" And you say, well, we're this new group that's formed on the left. But who are you really? And there's like a family tree. Everyone on the left has to have a family tree, as they say. They have to have a family tree, right? Well, you have to be a split from a split from a split from a split. Are you a Trotskyite? Are you a Maoist? And what's interesting is in mainstream politics, it's not like that. Someone just kind of emerges and starts putting forward a message. On the far right politics, it's not like that. Someone who's a fascist just comes out and starts being a fascist. But on the left, because the left in some ways functions almost like a religion or a sect or something, because of that, everyone has to be a split from somebody, and it's like everyone has to believe that if Karl Marx were alive, he would be in their group and not in anyone else's group. They are the one true party, and it's kind of a problem. And it all kind of points to a way of organizing that's not really accessible to the masses of people. It's a problem, right? It's a big problem, I would say. So as far as that, the Center for Political Innovation is the think tank. It's a center for political innovation. Someone says, what's the Center for Political Innovation? Well, it's a center, and it conducts political innovation. There are people working with us in establishing the CPI, that don't agree with me about various things. That's fine, right? There are people in different groups. I'm not looking to start a new party. I'm not looking to start a new sect, right? I'm not looking to do that. What I'm looking to do is set up an institution that can facilitate discussion and facilitate debate and facilitate the kind of education that needs to go on. That's what I want to do. I'm not really interested in forming a new a new party that would compete with all the other parties, maintain it was the one true party, run in elections against other parties, shit talk the other. That's not what I'm trying to do. And I'm not in a position to do that. I'm not an activist at this time. I'm definitely not an activist at this time. I am a journalist. I am a political analyst. I'm a writer. But I'm not an activist. And I can't be an activist. And I don't want to be an activist. I want to facilitate socialist education. And CPI is an institute, a center that will allow that. Greetings from Sydney. Caleb, are you familiar with John Bellamy Foster, and what do you think of his work? I used to read Monthly Review very regularly. Thank you for the super chat. I used to read Monthly Review pretty regularly, and I remember John Bellamy Foster's writing in Monthly Review, and it was Marxist economics, from what I understand. I believe he wrote a lot about Venezuela and supporting Venezuela. I don't keep up with his work as much as I once did. When I was, getting the Monthly Review regularly, I would keep up with John Bellamy Foster's work. I don't keep up with it as much, so I can't fully comment on it. I will say that John Bellamy Foster in the Monthly Review during the 2008 events in Iran, where there was this attempted, CIA destabilization of Iran, the Green Revolution or whatever, that Monthly Review actually took the correct position and called that out and didn't support this kind of pro-imperialist movement within Iran. Whereas most leftist groups took this position, well, the Iranian government are Ayatollahs, so therefore we support this CIA-backed movement. And even though it wants to embrace Western capitalism, that's fine with us because we don't like the Ayatollahs. But I know that Monthly Review and John Bellamy Foster took a better position, and that's certainly respectable. So I was asked about JFK. All right. So obviously, for those of you who don't know, John F. Kennedy was the president of the United States. And he came into office, and he was very much associated with, he was a liberal, right? There had been McCarthyism in the 50s, and by the end of the 1950s, there was kind of a blowback against McCarthyism. And starting in 1954, the civil rights movement really exploded. There had been a long civil rights movement in the United States. I mean, obviously, ever since African-American slaves were in the United States, they were fighting for their freedom, slave revolts, Nat Turner, etc. But starting in 1954, after the lynching of Emmett Till, and the Communist Party USA organized something called the Civil Rights Congress. And after Emmett Till was lynched, and the body of Emmett Till was photographed, this was a young African-American man who was accused of whistling at a white woman when he was visiting his family in the South. He lived in Chicago, and he was brutally murdered. And in response to that, in response to this brutal murder, there was protests that took place all across the country led by the Communist Party USA. Their organization was called the Civil Rights Congress, which was kind of a communist civil rights group that they organized. And the photograph of the mutilated body of Emmett Till was sent all over the world. The Soviet Union showed that photograph everywhere. And in response to that, there were many sections of the U.S. ruling class who felt like Jim Crow hurt the international image of the United States. It hurt the reputation of the United States and the Kennedy family in particular. The Kennedy family had been in Boston politics for a long time. And they were McCarthyists, anti-communists, Roman Catholics. They were Irish Catholics. They were tied in with some, they were actually, if you look at their roots, they were tied in with, with gangsterism and with the selling of alcohol during Prohibition. They whatever. They were a big family in Boston, a big Irish political family. And they had been McCarthyists and they were Roman Catholics, but they didn't like the Southern Dixiecrats. And they became, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, they became associated, talk about the anti-Comintern Pact, okay. They became associated with the civil rights movement. And, John F. Kennedy was very good looking, and he was young. He was very young, and he was the first Catholic president. You have to remember, there was a lot of discrimination against Catholics in the United States historically. My grandmother, who was Irish, told me that her first political memory she ever had was she actually remembered that how, as an Irish child who was from a Protestant family growing up in Ohio, when Al Smith ran for president, he was a Roman Catholic Democrat, right? The first thing that she remembers was how everyone was saying, "Don't vote for Al Smith because he's a Catholic and Catholics are no good. They're not real Christians. They're loyal to a foreign government." And so that there was just this hatred among middle American Protestants for Catholics. Catholics were considered to be, urban folks. They were foreigners. They were Irish. They were Italian. They were Eastern European, and that there was this hatred for Roman Catholics. Catholics drank alcohol, or at that point, most Protestants were conservative and didn't drink alcohol. Catholics were considered to be this foreign group. And so when John Kennedy got elected as president as a Roman Catholic, that was a big breakthrough. So he was associated with the Civil Rights Movement. He was the first Catholic president, and he was very much tied in. He was liberal. I mean, he was tied in with the liberal establishment. You talk about the Eastern establishment, New England money, Rockefellers, and all of that. But there was a pretty clear division within the U.S. ruling class related to how to fight the Soviet Union, how to fight communism. Kennedy felt like the way to fight the Soviet Union was with soft power, and with CIA coups, and with economic development to U.S.-aligned countries, and that they needed the civil rights movement, and they needed to have a more liberal approach at home. He was a Cold War liberal, and a lot of the ruling class of the United States were tied in with the military-industrial complex, and I've talked about that divide in U.S. politics before. And he was killed in Dallas, and Dallas was a very conservative city. It was a hotbed of right-wing and far-right activism. Let's remember that the John Birch Society, which was, this was a far-right group that believed that Dwight Eisenhower, the Republican president, had secretly been a communist. They hated John F. Kennedy, and they were big in Dallas, and they were very big. And the military, Dallas is a very military city, a lot of military activity there. And that's where he was killed. That's where he was killed. He was killed in Dallas. JFK was killed in Dallas. So, I just canceled my flight for Lodging for July for the Dem convention. I don't think it will happen. Do you? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Very good chance it won't happen. That's a good point, Kinky. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying I don't know. I don't know how long this is going to last. I know our economy can't take too much more of it. But yes, JFK, there was a division in the ruling class, and he represented one faction, and he didn't want to escalate the Vietnam War. He was certainly not opposed to interventionism, right? Kennedy was certainly in favor of coups and subversion, but he was more of a soft power guy. He wasn't the military-industrial complex's guy. Now, as far as the details, there are a lot of people who know way, way more about that than I do, right? And they'll talk about the parade route and all of that. I'm not going to get into that magic bullet theory and all. I'm not going to go there. I'm just telling you there was a big division in the ruling class. Kennedy was on one side of it, and he was very strongly associated with one side of it. He was probably the biggest political expression of that side of it, and that he aligned with the civil rights movement. He wasn't the best friend of the civil rights movement. He betrayed the civil rights movement a number of times, but he was in the public mind associated with the civil rights movement. And there was a section of the ruling class that had it in for Kennedy, no question about it. So I hope I've answered that question. All right, the anti-Comintern Pact. Interesting fact. Japan, Italy, and Nazi Germany were allies during the Second World War. Everyone knows that, for the most part. What people do not know, is that the alliance between those countries is called the Anti-Comintern Pact. So how in the world do people think that Hitler was a communist? I don't know. This is like the right wing. They have it in their mind. Oh my God, all the Nazis, see, it was National Socialists, so Nazis are communists. There you go. They're communists. Nazis are communists. Well, why would they form the Anti-Comintern Pact? Why did Mein Kampf say to rid the world of Bolshevism? Why was Hitler's entire platform about how Marxism was an evil Jewish conspiracy that he was going to eradicate by building a strong state? Anyone who reads anything that the Nazis put out knows that the Nazis were not Marxists. They had no love for Bolshevism. They had no love for the Soviet Union. They were critical of free market capitalism. They had more of a nationalistic approach. They were more of a European far-right party. But right-wing anti-capitalism is a long-standing trend, right? You can read all about right-wing anti-capitalism. Probably the ideological father of the European far-right is Oswald Spengler. And Oswald Spengler, obviously not a communist, not an advocate of revolution, not an advocate for the working class, but he was critical of capitalism because he thought capitalism, it wasn't responsible, right? And there's Roman Catholic critiques of capitalism. There's long-standing right-wing people who feel capitalism is not traditional. It's not conservative, right? Capitalists are not following any moral code. They're just doing, what is in their own interest to make profits, and they should be loyal to the nation, or they should be loyal to religion, right? That there are right-wing critiques of capitalism, right? And the ignorance, just an example of American ignorance, that people assume that one can't be on the right and have any criticism of capitalism because all right wing it's like basically they think that all right wingers in all of history must have been 1980s Republicans, and that's just simply not the case. That's ignorance, right? Anyone who knows anything about Hitler or World War II history knows Hitler was not a Marxist, not a leftist, not a communist, and the fact that there is so much right wing material trying to make that case should be insulting, should be very insulting to you, right? I mean, because there are so many people that are just trying to tell you falsehoods. I've tweeted at Dinesh D'Souza before. I said, you don't respect your audience, and I stand by that. He doesn't respect his audience. Okay, now, capitalist stock market versus China. All right, in the United States, we have a stock market, right? And the stock market in the USA is the center of the economy. Almost everyone is somehow tied into the stock market. That doesn't mean everyone owns stocks. It means you work for a company that's traded on the stock market, or maybe your pension is on the stock market, or maybe everyone in the United States. I mean, it's like barely anyone is not somehow touched by the stock market. And when the U.S. stock market crashes, it has a big impact on the entire society. Thoughts on Grover Cleveland and anti-imperialism, okay? So the USA, the economy is centered around the stock market. In China, less than 6% of the country is in any way tied into the stock market. They have a stock market there, and the stock market, is very much, it exists. It brings in foreign investors. There's a lot of foreigners invested in it. And I have actually written about how in 2015, they had this horrendous, crash on the Chinese stock market, and nothing happened. I mean, it was just like, it went down this dramatic amount, and nothing happened. And the government actually stepped in and banned all short selling. That's betting on the stocks to go down. They froze all the selling in state-run industries. They called up folks and threatened arrest if they didn't do what the party said. The next week, the stock market was right back up where it used to be. And on top of that, less than 6% of the population is in any way tied into it, right? The Chinese economy is centered around the government. It has a stock market to facilitate foreign investment. Our stock market, however, is the center of the economy. The U.S. economy is centered around the stock market. So when the stock market tanks, we're screwed. That's why everyone's getting nervous about what's going on the stock market right now, because we, are so closely tied into it. A stock market, right? What is a stock market, right? You have corporations, right? A company, a business becomes incorporated, right? It becomes a publicly traded company, which means that people can buy shares of stock ownership in it. Right? And in China, they have done that, right? I mean, they've had many companies that they open stock ownership in as a way to get foreign investment into those companies. And a lot of them are state companies. They are state companies, right? And that happens in non-socialist countries as well. Brazil, for example, Petrobras, which is the Brazilian state-run oil company, right? It's nationalized, meaning that 51% of the shares, the majority of the shares, belong to the government. But there's that remaining 49%, and that allows capitalists to invest in it and make a profit. The MTA in New York City, right? It's private. It's a private company, but it's a state monopoly, right? It's what they call a public beneficent corporation. And the way it works is that technically it's a monopoly, but it's a private company, and it has investors, and it makes profits for them. And a lot of banks are heavily invested in our public transportation system. And it's crazy because a lot of libertarians don't know this. They complain about the public transportation. See, the government can't run things. Well, actually, it's not the government. This is a private company facilitated by the government. Sure, you can't set up your own MTA, right? It's a state monopoly, but it's a private company. And part of the reason I believe the service is so bad is that private companies are trying to make a profit in the end, and they do make lots of profits, and the city and the taxpayer ends up getting all the bills. I mean, it's a ripoff. The MTA is a ripoff. So I hope that answers that. Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland and anti-imperialism. I'm sorry. I don't associate Grover Cleveland with anti-imperialism. I see him, there's that time period in U.S. history between the Civil War and between World War One, and it's just kind of a blank, right? We know there was President McKinley, there was President Polk, right? There was Calvin Coolidge. I guess he was after World War One, but you know, it's that time period you don't really think about. Grover Cleveland, right? He was a president of the United States. Never really thought of him as an anti-imperialist. Now there was a divide. Let me put it this way: there was a divide in the American ruling class, right? Especially coming out of the Civil War. After the Civil War, there was a pretty big divide between the big monopolies and most of the American ruling class, and the Anti-Imperialist League was an organization that Mark Twain, the writer, was involved in, that a lot of the early labor unionists were involved in. I believe Samuel Gompers, the founder of the American Federation of Labor, was involved in the Anti-Imperialist League. A lot of well-respected writers were involved in the Anti-Imperialist League, but it represented probably the majority sentiment within the ruling class, which was the idea that the Spanish-American War and foreign interventionism was bad for the country. It was bad for the country's interest. And however, the richest of the rich did not agree. Reading William Z. Foster's history book, how crucial was the working class in getting Britain not involved in the American Civil War? Well, it was very crucial. But let me add that probably one of the biggest factors in making sure that the British didn't come into the American Civil War on the side of the Confederate slaveholders was Russia, right? So you have to remember, right? So the South it was plantations, right? Cotton, other crops, tobacco, right? Plantations. And Wall Street in the United States at that point, this was before the stock market got really big, but it was the center of insurance. And Wall Street insured slave exports. They insured ships that brought cotton to Britain, and they insured all kinds of slave exports. And London, right? That was the point where Britain was having its boom and becoming like the dominant country in the world economically because of their textile industry. And where did they get the cotton for the textile industry? It came primarily from the U.S. South. And obviously slavery is cheaper when you don't have to actually pay people. When you have people picking cotton for free as slaves, right? Unpaid labor, it's much cheaper. And because of that, the British Empire and the British textile capitalists were very supportive of the Southern slave system. And very vocal about it. They were very vocal about it. And the British were considering sending their forces to the United States to basically support the Confederates. That didn't happen, and one of the major reasons it didn't happen is because the Russians sent their navy to New York City, and there was Russian ships that came to New York City, and the Russians made clear that they would support the United States in the fight against the Confederacy. And that was a big moment, and people don't talk about that. That it was very possible the American Civil War could have exploded into a global war, but Russia very much prevented that. And also, Karl Marx and the Marxists of Britain, had a lot to do with that. The Marxists of Britain, right, the International Working Men's Association, they led protests where textile workers in the United States would refuse to work with cotton picked by slaves. And they had big rallies supporting Abraham Lincoln in the fight against slavery. And it wasn't just the Marxists. There were many progressive-minded people in Britain who opposed slavery. And there was a broad progressive movement in Britain, the Chartist movement. There were followers of Henry George, the economist. There was a big progressive side of British society. And those folks were very opposed to slavery. So while the British ruling class, the richest of the British ruling class, were in favor of maintaining the Confederacy, supporting the Confederacy, within Britain itself, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, who were living in exile in Britain, they were very opposed to slavery, and there was a lot. So I wanted to add that. Now let me. I think it's about the time that we do that thing. We do that thing we do that thing where you all give me your name and location, and I call you out as I see you. But before we do that, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you haven't already subscribed, be sure to subscribe. Hit the bell. Make sure you're getting the notifications for these lives, because I have a lot of people I know who are not getting the notifications. Hit it again if you have already hit it, and start giving me your names and locations. I see Alex in Las Vegas. I see Lincolnite Yankee in Charlotte, North Carolina. I see Swine Class way ahead of you. David Fox working from home. I see Broadway, North Carolina. I see John L. in St. Louis. Paul in D.C. Robert from Texas. Albany, New York. Lawrence Chu. Adam M. in Reno. Hi from Germany, says Adam Jensen. Christopher in Cleveland. San Diego, Tommy Ferraz. Heidi Edelweiss. It's Tanky Time in New Zealand. Liam Hicks somewhere in Virginia. Will DeMarco in Pennsylvania. Tennessee Hills. Dust James. Auckland, New Zealand. Noel Gonzalez. Austin, Texas. George Kraft. Dante Solano in Los Angeles. Boston, Massachusetts. Max Henson. Hi from Portugal. West Virginia. New York City, says Ulysses. Textile Workers, says Lady Ravenhair. Vallejo, California. Netherlands, says Noah Stout. Pomona, California. Never heard of it. Somewhere in the middle of quarantine, Texas, says KJ Mack. Hi from Portugal, says Raphael. Itatis in East Germany. Boris in Washington. Hello from Cleveland, Alex. Shaniqua from Buffalo. Can you talk about Nicolas Maduro? I will. Armagh, Ireland. Southern Louisiana. Jacob Maxey. Hi, Caleb. Maupin time. Wilmington, California. Wow. Amsterdam, Netherlands, says Johan. Italy, Milan. Shout out to all of you in Italy. You guys are suffering. North Dakota, says Dude Man. Talk about clerical fascism, says Tommy Ferraz. Pomona, Ontario. Folks, if you haven't tweeted this out, if you haven't shared this on Reddit or shared it on your Facebook, Madrid, Spain, says Harry, now is the time. Make this a bigger conversation. Bring your friends and family. Let's make this a bigger live. Local 13 ILWU in the house. International Longshore Warehouse Union. A great union. A strong union. One of the oldest radical unions. Paul from the UK. We have 2 Pauls with us tonight. I think I was taken off Twitter, says Dylan Small. Right? How about a shout out to Jim Hightower? He's a kind of a progressive radio host in Texas. Bendigo, Australia, says David Fox. Glad you were with us, David. Wow, folks. What are your thoughts on your debate with Destiny? Says Jay Stevanik. I thought I managed to do pretty well. And I want to do like a video recapping it. That's on my list of things to do. One thing about the debate with Destiny was that he was using on me a technique that he uses in every debate against everybody. Everybody. And what he does is he demands you give crazy specifics about exactly what you are proposing. And if you don't give those crazy specifics, if something in those really specific explanations that you're giving doesn't match up, right? He calls you out on it. And that is a technique that could be used against anybody, right? You could sit there and say, you know what, I'm for legalizing drugs. Okay, so tell me, how would you buy marijuana under your legalization of drugs? Well, you would have it at the drugstore. Really? Well, what about, children when they walk in? Are they just going to walk out of the store? Well, we would have to have IDs. Oh, so now you say you want to have ID. It's only for 18-year-olds. You didn't say that before. See, I got you. This is a technique you can use against anybody, anyone who's putting it forward. If you demand the specifics, right? If you demand every specific detail exactly, give me the blueprint of exactly how this is going to happen, anyone's going to look bad. And I saw that. I watched enough debates with Destiny before the debate. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. But he tried to run some of that on me. The other thing was that I could see him getting visibly frustrated at various points in the debates. What he really wanted to argue with me about was the history of the Soviet Union and China and all of that. And he wanted to, basically what he was trying to do, if you watch it, Destiny debates Nazis all the time. That's what he does. He debates white nationalists and Nazis, right? And he's kind of a moderate, kind of social democratic liberal. And I swear, and especially because the person who hosted the debate is this ex-alt-right guy named Faraday Speaks. Um, I think his first name is also Caleb. It's pretty clear that Destiny was trying to equate tankies like myself with Nazis, right? That's how they roll, right? And that's how mainstream people think, right? Stalin was worse than Hitler, right? That's a common trope, right? That if you support the Soviet Union, you're just kind of on the far left you have tankies, on the far right you have Nazis, and we're all exactly the same. And he was trying to pull that on me, and I saw that, and I was careful, right? I was careful to not get backed into. He was trying to frame the questions in a way where he could present me as if I'm somehow the equivalent of a Nazi. I wasn't going to let him do that, right? And there were people who were frustrated with me about the debate and say, why didn't you say this to him? Why didn't you say that to him? Because I could pick up on that, right? And that's the thing. You have to be very, very careful, right? There is a whole industry of people who try really, really hard to especially now, in light of the Russiagate hysteria and the whole Trump-Russia conspiracy theory, to really try to push the line that all anti-imperialist leftists are really Nazis, right? That's what these folks think. I don't want to get into that too much, but so you have to be careful to not fall into the traps where they can frame you that way. And it was pretty clear he was trying to do that. And I didn't let him do it. And he got visibly frustrated. I mean, he lost it. I mean, he was furious that he couldn't pull tricks on me. I've been arguing with people about communism my whole life. Trust me. Since I was very young, I've been arguing with people about communism. I've heard it all. I know the games that people play. And, Destiny, I mean, it was like he didn't expect that I would ever have any facts on my side, right? That, he just operated on this assumption that everyone knows the Soviet Union never accomplished anything, and, he knew, right? Never, could I ever, have any facts on my side or be right about anything. So therefore, when I came armed with facts, I did my research. I brought sources and information with me. And I kept talking all throughout the debate, and people said that was so annoying. Well, I'm sorry, but I was talking. I was just going to keep talking through that debate. I wasn't going to let him steamroll me. And I kept talking, and I brought my actual facts with me to cite them. And a lot of the debate was me pointing to facts about Cuba or about the Soviet Union or about China or whatever. And, in response to that, I would raise a fact, and then he would say, well, that fact doesn't count. You think most debates on YouTube are especially as useless? I think they are just a bunch of gotcha questions and shout out to your new book. Well, thank you for the super chat. And I don't think YouTube debates are useless, honestly. I think that they are productive. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who watch them. And, I mean, we're all doing our part, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who are interested in these ideas, like Britney Spears. I don't know if people saw, but Britney Spears tweeted out today, earlier this week, she tweeted out, "We will feed each other, redistribute wealth, strike." That was Britney Spears. She tweeted that out. I don't know if folks remember Britney Spears. I remember her from when I was like an adolescent. I was like an early adolescent, and I remember she was, she was the big bubblegum pop. That was back in the day of CDs, right? That was before people started downloading things on the internet with Napster. Swineclass says, "Oops, she did it again." And, that was before Napster. That was before people were downloading music. That was when you had to go and buy CDs. And if you turned on the television, Britney Spears was the hot commodity. She was, with her "Hit Me Baby One More Time," and she was the, what do you call it? She was just the teen icon, right? Of I think it was like early 2000, right? Like the year 2000, 2001, 2002, I'm thinking, right? Around the time of 9/11, she was kind of the teen icon. And I, of course, I wasn't really into popular culture. My family didn't really encourage me to listen to that kind of thing. So, I didn't really think about her too much. What I did think was interesting, I was forced when I saw that she had tweeted out this kind of woke tweet, if you want to call it that, this kind of social democratic, we will feed each other, redistribute wealth, strike tweet. I was forced to think about a couple things about Britney Spears. One thing about Britney Spears is that she is from the South, right? She's from the southern United States. Um, and you don't have that many celebrities who are from the South. Most celebrities tend to be from New England or especially from California. Almost any U.S. born celebrity you've ever heard of is from California, right? Or Canada. I don't know why. There's a lot of Canadians in the United States, like Jim Carrey. I mean, you look at the number of Canadian movie stars, it's a little bit weird. But, California, New England, New York. But Britney Spears was born in Mississippi. Um, and she actually grew up most of her childhood in Louisiana. And because of that, there have been a couple embarrassing incidents that come to mind. For example, we remember that Britney Spears, she did a lot of Pepsi commercials at one point. I don't know if people remember that. At one point, she was making money doing these Pepsi commercials. And it became a scandal because in the middle of a shoot where she was filming one of these Pepsi commercials, she shouted, "I want a Coke," after they stopped filming. It was like, cut, and she's like, "I need a Coke." Right? And everyone thought that was just scandalous. Absolutely scandalous because, Pepsi and Coke are big competitors. So how dare she say that? But, but, and I know this because I've got family from the South. My father's family are from the South. In the South, in the southern regions of the United States, the term for soda is Coke, right? Where I was growing up in Ohio, we called soda pop. I'm going to go have a pop, right? Here in New England, in urban areas, Chicago, California, everyone says, "I'm going to go have a soda. I'm going to go have a soda." Well, in the South, people say, "I'm going to go have a Coke." And it can be a Sprite Coke. It can be an orange Coke. It can be a Pepsi Coke. It can even be a Pepsi Coke, right? That's the terminology. So when Britney Spears, was filming this Pepsi commercial, and she shouted, "Get me a Coke," all these New England liberals were just turning their nose up. "Oh, what a fool. She doesn't even realize who she's..." But no, she realized it. That's Southern vernacular. That's what she grew up in. Interestingly enough, Britney Spears grew up as a Southern Baptist, right? And her family were evangelicals. Her grandparents were very active in Southern Baptist politics. And that's one thing I think is quite interesting. If a tweet like that had gone out from just some typical run-of-the-mill Hollywood celebrity, I wouldn't think much of it. But the fact that Britney Spears is from the U.S. South, where they talk about Pepsi Coke and Orange Coke and Coke, and that she grew up as an evangelical Southern Baptist, the fact that she tweeted out, this rather class-conscious tweet, I think that shows hope for the country. Let me put it that way. I'm not saying that necessarily means things. And I know she's tweeted out some other stuff. Some people were showing me some other things that she's tweeted out. Obviously, she's not going to become the leader of socialism in the United States. She's not. But, good for her, right? I'm glad that she is, getting interested in socialistic and class politics. I think that's a good thing on her part. And that she is a little bit more salt of the earth. She's a little bit more, middle America than other celebrities are. And I will give her that credit. What's actually kind of interesting to me, random fact, when we're talking about 90s stars or whatever, I come from a little town in Ohio. It's called Orrville. It's where Smucker's jelly is made. I graduated from Orrville. I was class of 2006. I graduated from their high school. But before I was in Orrville, when I was a very small child, my family, we lived in a little town near there that's even smaller than Orrville, and it's called Dalton, Ohio. And one of the singers for NSYNC, the pop group, right? They were around the same time as Britney Spears, like Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC. One of the singers from NSYNC, one of the older ones, is actually from Dalton, where I grew up. And I remember at one point when he was at the height of his fame, he was back in Dalton and he went to a restaurant. And people talked about the fact that he went to the Dairyette, which was this little tiny dairy ice cream restaurant in my little town. People talked about the fact that this guy from NSYNC had gone there for years. Like, people couldn't stop talking about it. The fact, oh my God, this guy who's originally from Dalton and is now an NSYNC, and he went to the Darriette, and people talked about nothing. People talked about nothing but the fact that the NSYNC guy had been. I mean, it was funny. I thought that was hilarious. And it was just the talk of the town. And it was a little bit weird that this guy, I mean, I don't remember which one of the guys it was, but he apparently was a graduate of Dalton High School in Ohio. And he was one of the older NSYNC members. He wasn't Justin Timberlake or anything like that. He was one of the older ones that no one ever talks about. And no one ever seemed to really know much about what had gone on between him graduating from Dalton High School and becoming the NSYNC guy. No one really knew anything about it. It was just kind of like, oh, and he went on to be an NSYNC, and he went to the Darriette, and people remembered it for years. They would be like, oh, that NSYNC guy, 3 years ago, Caleb, he went to the Darriette. What's your overall stance on indigenous issues? I think that too many communists ignore them to their detriment. Well, I mean, here's the thing. What is my stance on indigenous issues? I mean, there's no question that Native Americans have been treated horrifically. There's no question that they have suffered genocide, that they have been robbed of their land, that they are owed reparations, that the way that they have been, been relegated to reservations and the conditions that they live in, I mean, it's unforgivable what has been done. And obviously, justice needs to be had. There needs to be some effort to improve their situation. And that these crimes, people make it sound like this happened a long time ago, right? Well, I remember when I was a high school student, I actually went and did some volunteer work on a reservation in North Dakota. And I mean, this is still going on. And the Indian schools, that was horrendous. The way these Native American children were taken from their parents forcibly to government schools where they were indoctrinated with Christianity and had their language literally beaten out of them. It's absolutely horrendous. But what can be done? What can be done? Well, I would ask Native Americans, what do they want to be done about it? Right? I'm not here to tell them what they should be demanding from society. But obviously, it needs to be addressed. And, there was the American Indian movement of the 1970s. That did, some really militant activism, really radical stuff, seizing islands and seizing buildings. And, there were shootouts, right? The Wounded Knee incident in 1973. It's a long-standing issue, and it's a long-standing issue. And I'm not here to say what the Native Americans should want to be done. Obviously, something needs to be done. And if I would ask the indigenous people, what do you want? What do you think could be done to address the long-standing crimes that have been committed against you? That's what I would say. I would ask. I mean, I would just simply ask. Leonard Peltier is a political prisoner, right? Many people do not believe he killed those FBI agents. Grew up homeschooled, Bob Jones University, Bob Jones homeschool movement. Okay, we'll write that down. Thank you. Leonard Peltier. Many people. I mean, it was probably friendly fire that killed those FBI agents. Many people don't believe that that he killed those FBI agents, and I mean, that's all I can say about that. And that Leonard Peltier, he's a political prisoner. And I did a video. I know he's running for president, I believe, on the ticket of the PSL. One of the socialist groups is running him to raise awareness about his case, and that's a very good thing that they're doing, to raise awareness about his case. And I've talked before about how the FBI is really committed to keeping Leonard Peltier in prison. There were rumors that Clinton was going to free Leonard Peltier, and the FBI had a demonstration at the White House basically threatening Bill Clinton. So as far as Bob Jones University, right, that is a fundamentalist, I believe, Baptist college, right? And they were known for, at one point, they had a policy of not allowing any interracial dating on campus. Bob Jones University, right? And it's a fundamentalist, evangelical kind of thing. BJU, And, George W. Bush spoke there at one point during his first presidential campaign in 2000. And it was very controversial because, now they don't allow any interracial dating, but they're not an all-white campus. Now that's important to point out. People want to categorize them like they're Nazis or white supremacists. No, they're not. They're evangelical fundamentalists. And there were many black students at Bob Jones University, but and they weren't allowed to have interracial dating. They were opposed to interracial dating. And it's a very, very conservative school. They don't allow rock music of any kind, not Christian rock and roll, no rock and roll. I mean, women wear dresses down to their ankles. They don't wear pants. It's one of those, right? You talk about Reverend Jack Hiles of Indiana he had the biggest church in the world at one point, Hammond Baptist Church in Indiana. It was really close to Chicago. But it was the biggest church in the entire country, and he was an independent Baptist, and I think it's that kind of thinking. I'm not sure that Jack Hiles was in the same denomination as Bob Jones University, but it's that kind of thinking, right? That women don't wear pants, that interracial dating isn't okay, that there's no such thing as Christian rock and roll. All rock and roll is bad. I went to school with people who felt like that. There were people at my high school who were part of that, right? I mean, most people in my area were like Mennonites or apostolics or brethren, but there was some of that, right? And there was the non-denominational stuff, but Bob Jones University and that homeschooling, right? The homeschooling movement. Now that's particularly interesting because not all homeschoolers, right? That's among the religious right. There's a big push for homeschooling, right? The idea is, well, I'm going to teach my kids at home. I don't want them to go to a public school. And for the ones who are evangelicals who do that, the feeling is, well, the public schools are going to teach my children evolution. The public schools are going to teach my children about gay marriage and abortion. They're going to, expose my children to views that are non-Christian, and my kids are kind of my property. Their mind is mine. I have the right to mold their mind with my beliefs and not have them be indoctrinated by the public schools. I want my kids to grow up to be evangelicals like me. And it fits the American mindset, right? And this is a part of our culture, right? In the United States, settler culture, right? A man's house is his castle, they say, right? And the idea was that a lot of Americans, a lot of the American white settlers were religious fanatics from Europe, and they didn't like European mainstream society for whatever reason. So they got on a boat and they came to the United States and they moved to the middle of the woods in some area. They killed whatever Native Americans were there, and they set up their ideal religious community. Um, and that was, they were getting away from Europe and they were trying to start their ideal religious community in the United States. And then often, as we see in the case of New England, right, they would have a fight with somebody, and, Roger Williams and, Anne Hutchinson and all of that, right? So, you know, that's part of U.S. history, right? Pennsylvania was Penn's Woods after William Penn, the Quaker. He wanted to start an ideal Quaker society in Pennsylvania. He was a pacifist. For some reason, his pacifism did not apply to Native Americans. He had no problem killing Native Americans. But, you can go down the line, right? I believe at the time the United States was established, 9 of the 13 colonies had state religions. And that's why in the United States we have the separation of church and state. It's actually fascinating. But 9 of the 13 colonies had official state religions. So the only way they could get the 13 colonies to agree to ratify the Constitution of the United States was if they officially had no state religion. So that, there would be no way that one of the smaller states would feel like religion would be imposed on them, right? If you were Pennsylvania and you're Quakers, you didn't want, the Puritans of Massachusetts to impose Puritanism on Pennsylvania, right? And Quakers were not very nicely treated in Pennsylvania or in Massachusetts by the folks. They were in Pennsylvania. They were not in Massachusetts, right? I believe Baltimore and Maryland, it was Mary's land. That was for Roman Catholics. That's where you could go if you were a Roman Catholic. And Roman Catholics were especially hated. So the idea of the separation of church and state, the way it began, that clause that's in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, part of the Bill of Rights, the way it was intended, the idea was that there would be a separation of church and state, right? So that none of these states and none of these people that had moved to the United States in order to practice their obscure religion in their own way would be messed with, right? That the federal government wouldn't mess with them, right? There would be no, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or abridging, free practice thereof. And that was kind of, it was like an assumption. The government will be neutral on matters of religion. That was kind of the idea, right? We're going to set up a federal government in the United States. All the 13 colonies will be united into one country, but there will be neutrality. This federal government will not profess one belief, so you don't have to worry. That was kind of the idea. Now, obviously, the history of constitutional law in the United States, later, we have a rule that the Bill of Rights doesn't just apply to the federal government, it applies to state governments also. That was a Supreme Court ruling. That continued. And from there, now there's the issue of atheists, right? And, atheism was obviously not a big factor at the time the United States was founded. In a way, it was, right? Thomas Jefferson was definitely not a Christian, right? And many of the founding fathers of the United States were not Christians. They were what you could call pantheists. They were deists. They had kind of mystical beliefs. They worshiped nature. They believed in like a clockmaker god. But they were religious skeptics, right? We know about the Jefferson Bible, for example. Thomas Jefferson, he put out his own Bible, and he cut out the Old Testament completely, and he cut all of the miracles of Jesus out, and it was purely the words of Jesus, and it's called the Jefferson Bible, and you can still get copies of it. It's in print, and it's called like the life and activities of Jesus Christ, and he did it. Thomas Jefferson said that the reason he did it was he wanted to preserve the message of Jesus, and he feared that in more reasoned and rational times, people would throw out the message of Jesus because they didn't believe in the magical stuff, the miracles. And so his hope was to preserve the message of Christ, and not have it be tainted by the mystical and magical religious beliefs that he found to be irrational. So Thomas Jefferson was definitely not, not an evangelical, definitely not a Bible believer. But, at the same time, in Thomas Paine, right? He was the author of Common Sense. He was very outspoken in his anti-clericalism, he called it. And he wrote about the fact that he believed that the basic outline of the life of Jesus Christ was an allegory, right? It was for the sun rising, right? The sun rising, and that the Easter allegory and all of that. Can you tell us about your time with Alexander Dugin, and what is your perspective on Eurasianism and National Bolshevism? Okay. Alexander Dugin is a very important political thinker in Russia. He has said many things that I do not agree with, and he has said many things that I do agree with. And he's interesting, and he's vitally important. And everywhere I have gone in the anti-imperialist world, people are studying and reading Alexander Dugin's writings, and not agreeing with him on some things and agreeing with him on other things. When I was in Iran, Iranians are reading Alexander Dugin. When I was in Venezuela, Venezuelans are reading Alexander Dugin. When I go to communist youth festivals in Ecuador, went to one in Sochi, Russia, you can bet there are people there studying Alexander Dugin. It's important stuff, right? And this concept of Eurasianism. This is big thinking, fourth political theory and all of that. I disagree with some of it very strongly, right? Probably the primary disagreement I have with Dugin is that I am a believer in historical progress. I believe that history is marching forward like a train. I'm an adherent of dialectical materialism for the most part. I'm more spiritual. I'm not a full hard materialist, but I believe in dialectics very strongly. I have no question about that. I do believe change comes through struggle and contradiction, number one. And I'm a historical materialist. And one of the principal foundations of Dugin's fourth political theory and of Eurasianism is this belief that there is no such thing as historical progress. And he hammers this home in his writing, right? That the past, the present, and the future are equal. I don't believe that. I disagree. I believe in historical progress. But Dugin, he's very observant. He's very tuned in to what people around the world who oppose Western capitalism and imperialism believe. And he's very, you read the fourth political theory, you read some of his books, he's very tuned into what people think, and his views are very widely respected among anti-imperialists. So That's all there is to it. People want to make it like a scandal that I went to an event and spoke with Dugin and with some of the people in Russia. And no, I think that they're an important force, right? They are anti-imperialists and they are Russian nationalists. They are traditionalists. They're Orthodox, religious folks. They do respect the Soviet Union. They do think that the Soviet Union represented, some of the greatness of Russia's history as a civilization. They have their own views. And I don't. They're not fascists. They're not Nazis. They're just. It's a view, and it's certainly not the only view in Russia. It's really overblown in Western media. Western media makes it out like everyone in Russia believes this. Putin is just getting his instructions from Dugin. That's not true. I can tell you that's not true. There are many different forces in Russia that have many different political views. Dugin is one voice in Russian society. And he's well known and he's respected as a political scientist and a political theorist in Russia. And on that basis, I met with him, and I read his writings. I know what he has to say. I think he reads and studies what I have to say. I mean, as far as I know. I mean, I respect them. I think that they're a political force. Now, you asked about National Bolshevism. There was a party called the National Bolsheviks in Russia in the 1990s. That party no longer exists. And I believe the other founder of it, I think Dugin was involved with it, but the other founder of it, I think, was this novelist, and he just died. His name is escaping me at this moment, but there was a novelist who was associated with that party as well. Yeah, I've met Dugin. I've met people from the Eurasian movement, and like I said, I don't agree with them on everything. Obviously, on a lot of points, there's just not any disagreement. Edward Luminov is the name, yeah, and I think he just died, if I'm not mistaken. But there. If you want to understand politics as it currently is, right? This isn't the Cold War anymore, right? It used to be that if you wanted to understand, the political ideas in the world, you had to just read mainstream American thinkers. Um, Liam Hicks is asking me what I think of Edward Luminov. I don't know. I have never read his books. I don't know enough about him. I never met him. Don't know anything about him, honestly. This is not a field I know a lot about. I have read Dugin. I've studied Dugin's writings. I can give you an honest assessment of that. Never met Edward Luminov. I know he wrote novels, like novels that were kind of from like the punk rock era, and he's widely loved. A lot of people really love his work. I don't know him. I can't give you an answer to that question. But Dugan I've had the opportunity to meet with and speak with, and go to conferences and such. And like I said, interesting folks, and I respect them. And they are definitely anti-imperialist and definitely anti-capitalist. They have a little bit. They have a little bit of a different viewpoint than I have. You should watch. There's a very good interview with Alexander Dugin that was on RT, and he was interviewed for like a whole half hour by an RT host, and she argued with him vehemently. She didn't agree with him. But you should watch it because he defends his ideas, and she argues with him. Can you talk about Saddam Hussein? What are your thoughts on Saddam Hussein? Well, Saddam Hussein was the leader of Ba'athist Arab socialism in Iraq. Baathism is a political movement that started in Syria. I've talked a lot about Michel Aflaq, who was kind of the founder of Baathism. It was a breakaway from the Communist Party of Syria. In Syria, the Communist Party, was saying that they needed to have an alliance with the French, against the fascists, right? And since Syria was a colony of France, that meant not resisting being colonized. So the Syrian Arab communists who wanted to continue resisting the French occupier and colonizer, they formed the Ba'athist movement. And Baathism believes that all the Arab people are one nation, right? The countries of the Arab world, the borders were drawn up at the Sykes-Picot Agreement. I don't know if people know about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, but you should know about it because it was a secret treaty. During World War I, you had a secret treaty by the countries that eventually won. Russia, France, Britain, the United States. They made this secret treaty called the Sykes-Picot Agreement where they drew the borders of the Middle East, right? It was after they defeated the Ottoman Empire and Turkey in World War I. They were going to carve up the Middle East, and they made this secret treaty. And the Bolsheviks made it public. It was like the original WikiLeaks, right? The Bolsheviks seized power, and when they took power, they opened up all the secret, files of the Tsar, and the secret police in Russia and all the secret treaties and agreements, and they published what was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And they published it, and they made it a public document, the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And, it divided up the Arab world, and it picked out, the House of Saud to be the leaders of Saudi Arabia. It picked out the monarchy, the Hashemite monarchy of Jordan, and it drew up the borders of the Middle East for geopolitical and strategic regions. And obviously, France got Syria. Syria was a French colony. And there were people in Syria that were resisting the French colonizers. And the Alawites, interestingly, right? The Alawites were a section that was a religious group in Syria. It's a form of Shia Islam, but they feel that the angel, they have their own beliefs. I understand they believe that the angel who was sent to Muhammad was supposed to go to Ali, but actually went to Muhammad by accident, something like that. It's Alawitism, right? The Alawites in Syria were kind of selected by the French to have kind of a special privilege under the occupation, and they were given military training. And they were used as kind of the officers in the Syrian military. And interestingly, though, they're the ones that ended up overthrowing the French and driving the French out of Syria. The Ba'ath party in Syria, the leaders of it mainly were Alawites because those were military folks. The French colonizers had this military movement, and it was the Alawites who ended up being, the anti-imperialists. And all throughout the Middle East, the Arab world, you had what you called patriotic officers. And those were folks, you had it in Egypt, you had it in Libya, you had it in Iraq and elsewhere where, you had military guys that were in the military in these Arab countries, and they were tired of colonization and occupation. And, the USA and the West was putting a lot of money into the military, and these military guys, these young military guys, they would rise up and they would have a coup and kick out the imperialists and start aligning with the Soviet Union and start aligning with socialist countries in the name of Arab nationalism and Arab socialism. Abdul Nasser in Egypt is probably the first example of that. Baathism and the Ba'ath movement is another example of that. Gaddafi is another example of that. But they were striving to build socialism, and they came out of the military in the Arab countries. And, Iraq under Saddam Hussein was very much one of those movements. Saddam Hussein, I mean, his behavior during the Iraq-Iran war was horrendous, right? And I know that, there are people I respect who will disagree with me about that, but, the Iraq-Iran war was horrendous. It was a horrendous crime. Saddam Hussein was getting support from the United States, the Iraq-Iran war should never have happened. Over 1 million people died, and that while the Iraq-Iran war was happening, in the United States, people didn't even know what was going on. Millions of people were dying. Chemical weapons were being used. I mean, it was an awful, awful war. And it ultimately benefited the imperialists because it significantly weakened the Islamic Revolution of Iran, which was an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist revolution, and it significantly weakened the Ba'athist Arab Socialist revolution of Iraq. Both countries suffered horrendously. People died in mass. It was a horrendous, horrendous war that should never have happened. And you see that, and that often, let's remember, it was happening, this was the 1980s, was basically when it was happening, but it was around the same time, just shortly after, the same kind of thing happened, you'll remember, in Indochina, what they call Indochina, or Southeast Asia, right, where there were two anti-imperialist countries, right, there was the communists of Kampuchea or Cambodia, and the communists of Vietnam, and the communists of China, and the imperialists manipulated they had Pol Pot, who was being covertly supported by the United States, who was a crazed ultra-leftist, who was slaughtering the Marxist-Leninists in Cambodia, Vietnam then intervening in Cambodia to rescue the Marxist-Leninists, then China declaring that Vietnam was working on behalf of the Soviet social imperialists and invading Vietnam, and you had communists and killing other communists in Southeast Asia. And of course, who was the beneficiary of that? U.S. imperialism was the beneficiary of that, right? When communists are killing other communists. Well, that happened in the Middle East. It wasn't communists. It was Islamic revolutionaries in Iran, Ba'athist Arab socialists in Iraq, killing each other in mass. And who benefited, right? The imperialists benefited, right? And covert support was given to both sides, from what I understand. The USA at one point was covertly supporting Iraq, at another point was covertly supporting Iran, and that it was a horrendous war that should never have happened, and it was a tragedy. I mean, it was just horrendous, and there were things that Iran did during the Iraq-Iran war that I certainly don't approve of, and there are many things that Iraq did during the Iraq-Iran war that I wouldn't approve of. And I think that again, this was Brzezinski's strategy. Zbigniew Brzezinski right, was this Cold War strategist, a Polish guy, Polish-born guy who had this strategy of manipulating contradictions within the anti-imperialist and socialist camp in order to benefit for U.S. imperialism. And he spent a lot of his career going across Eastern Europe and stirring up people in Poland and Hungary and places like that to fight against the Soviet Union. He courted, the intellectuals in the Eastern Bloc and knew how to kind of manipulate their grievances. And he set up the Afghan trap, it was called, where he lured the Soviet Union into Afghanistan by basically, setting the stage, forcing the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan to take power. Right, in 1978 in Afghanistan, you had the Sour Revolution, it was called, and basically Afghanistan was a monarchy, but the communist, was right on the border with the Soviet Union, and what they called the People's Democratic Party, which was a Marxist-Leninist political party, was allowed to, participate in government. The Soviets were right there. They had to have a relationship with the Soviet Union, so the Marxist-Leninist Party was allowed. So Brzezinski and the United States put pressure on the Afghan government to basically start killing communists. So the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan was strong enough that they could, in that instance, they were being slaughtered. So they were big enough. They had enough military people who backed them. They could take power. So they took power. But they took power they weren't ready to have a revolution yet. The population of Afghanistan is very rural and very religious and very conservative. And the People's Democratic Party was this pro-Soviet, Marxist-Leninist party that was based in urban areas. Hi, comrades. Do you think that the ruling classes will use... Of course, and I'm going to talk about that. Thank you, David. But it was based in urban areas. And they weren't ready to take power. And they were being slaughtered, so they took power. And the population wasn't really fully behind them. And that was what Brzezinski called the Afghan trap, because it set up a situation where, he was able to foment, with the help of Osama bin Laden and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and a religious theocratic insurgency against the Soviet Union, against the People's Democratic Party, and then the Soviet Union sent its forces to support the People's Democratic Party. It was a mess. Brzezinski, he did all of this. Brzezinski, the Iraq-Iran War was very much, I believe, Brzezinski was very, very happy that happened and happy to push both sides against each other, just like he was very happy to see what happened in Southeast Asia, in the Kampuchea War, just like he was very happy to set up the Afghan trap. This is the thing, right? The hardline anti-communists in the U.S. want to have the attitude that all communists are trash, we hate all communists. Brzezinski and the liberals say, let's manipulate. Let's find some communists and support them covertly and play them against the other communists. That's their strategy, right? And that's more of a liberal strategy. And conservatives and the military-industrial complex doesn't like that because it involves spending a lot of money. If you're going to be covertly arming people and supporting them, you have to, spend money, right? You have to recognize that some of these people have real grievances and concerns. It's like smart imperialism, right? And that's what that Eastern establishment, that's what this Zbigniew Brzezinski, that's what Henry Kissinger and all of them were all about, right? It was a smarter strategy for running empire. This is the Rockefellers, right? This is the Rockefeller think tanks. This is the CIA. The military-industrial complex just wants to make money blowing stuff up. They don't care. They don't care, right? They don't want to. They don't want to listen to, they don't want to find out about how these people feel in these developing countries. They don't want to listen to people's grievances. They don't want to covertly arm one communist group because they think they can manipulate them against another communist group. They don't care about that. They just want to make money, right? And that's one of the divides there. So now David Fox asked about coronavirus and ulterior motives. Well, I wanted to talk about that because it's very clear. One ulterior motive is anti-China. I mean, the fact that Mike Pompeo, has just insisted on calling it the Wuhan virus. That's unbelievable. And that, they're escalating. They're ratcheting up the sanctions against Iran, ratcheting up the sanctions against Venezuela. Mike Pompeo is a psychopath. I mean, he really is. He's from a particular faction, right? CIA, I was just talking about, CIA tend to be liberals, right? It's Brzezinski. It's this kind of like, how do we soft power, manipulate? But there's a particular faction of the CIA that the Bush family comes out of. You remember that George Herbert Walker Bush was director of the CIA for a long time. but he was more in with the military-industrial complex. He represented a neocon wing, like a neocon thinking within the CIA. Gina Haspel, who is the current CIA director. People just look on the internet about her record with torture, for example. And who was obviously running the CIA before Gina Haspel? Mike Pompeo, right? And John Brennan, right? John Brennan was Obama's CIA director. And you'll remember John Brennan said he would never torture anybody. Never would he torture anybody. Obama would have to find a new CIA director. He would never torture anybody. There were all kinds of rumors that John Brennan was a Muslim, right? Now, that was never confirmed, but John Brennan had been the CIA director in Saudi Arabia for years, and the rumors went around that John Brennan had at one point converted to Islam in Saudi Arabia. Now, that was never confirmed. No one was able to confirm that. But John Brennan did admit that he voted for the Communist Party in the 1976 elections, right? That he voted communist. He voted for the Communist Party. He was never a member of the Communist Party, but he voted for them as kind of a protest when he was a young man, and that he was kind of a young leftist. And, he was in Saudi Arabia. He understands Islam quite a bit. And, that faction of the CIA, that's the Brzezinski wing. That's the Eastern establishment. Those folks are about soft power manipulation. And that tends to be the view. I mean, the CIA, it's covert money, right? For years, the CIA had a program, a psychic program. Read about this, folks. It was leaked, recently. For years, the CIA was paying people lots of money to sit in a cabin in the woods and do psychic and try to see with their mind. Like during the Iranian hostage crisis, the Carter administration, right? Jimmy Carter called himself a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. The Carter administration had all kinds of money spent on psychics, and they were trying to get people to use psychic powers to rescue the Iranian hostages. I mean, this is, but MK Ultra and the spreading of drugs throughout the United States, CIA. The CIA tend to be more liberal in how they view things, but there is a faction within the CIA, the Bush family in particular. Gina Haspel and Mike Pompeo comes out of that faction, there you go. Now, John L. is asking, what about the original National Bolshevism I don't know why so many people in these comments are so fascinated by all this stuff. So, okay, right. Now, the political party in Russia in the 1990s that called itself National Bolsheviks traced its roots to a disagreement within the Communist International during the 1920s, right? So you remember the 1920s after World War I, right? There was, Germany lost, was being forced to pay lots of reparations. The economy was demolished. What was the Ethiopia-Somali War? Another similar divide and conquer. Okay, Ethiopia-Somali War. Right. So, in the 1920s in Germany, it lost World War I. It's an imperialist country, but it's stripped of its colonies. Germany is being forced to pay reparations for World War I. The Versailles Treaty is signed. Now, communists always opposed the Versailles Treaty, right? Always opposed the Versailles Treaty. Why should the German working class have to pay for the crimes of the German imperialists? The Social Democrats supported the Versailles Treaty. However, the German communists always opposed it, right? And the Nazis also opposed it, too. The Nazis said Germany had done nothing wrong during World War I. Well, the communists said, yeah, the German government had done wrong things during World War I, but why should the workers have to pay for the crimes, right? Why should working people have to pay their taxes, reparations for the crimes of German imperialism? There was a lot of disagreement in the German Communist Party, right? You have to remember that right after World War I, there was a revolution in Germany, Germany, you had the government of Germany fell, and the soldiers started shooting their officers, and there was a new government was formed, right? And the Social Democratic Party was basically the new government, and this was the party that Marx built. I mean, the German Social Democratic Party was the flagship party of the Second International. It was the Marxist party. It was the biggest Marxist party in the world. And in the November Revolution of 1919, at the end of World War I, the Kaiser of Germany basically ordered the Navy. There had already been peace declared on land, and the Kaiser of Germany ordered the German Navy to just go and, die. And they didn't do it, and they shot their officers and seized their ships. All across Germany, you had an uprising of workers against German capitalism, and the Social Democratic Party, the Independent Social Democratic Party, which was an anti-war faction of the Social Democratic Party that had broken away, they took power. and they were, forming a new government. It was very exciting, right? In Bavaria, right? Bavaria, which is a Roman Catholic, section and province in Germany, they declared the Bavarian Soviet Republic. And Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, and they wanted to have a revolution, right? They were moving, Germany had a revolution, but the Social Democratic Party of Germany managed to wrench defeat out of the jaws of victory. They fell on their face. They wrote a constitution that was a capitalist constitution. They did not establish socialism, even though socialists had risen up and toppled the government. They didn't establish socialism. And then, when Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht tried to continue fighting for socialism, they killed them, right? And the German Social Democrats and the Social Democratic Party formed this thing called the Freikorps, free officers who were, former soldiers in World War I who went around killing communists. And they started killing anybody who wouldn't go along with the creation of the Weimar Republic, right? So there was a huge amount of bad blood between German communists and German Social Democrats, right? And that is really important if you want to understand German left politics in the 1920s, right? You think that now, like DSA and the RCP don't get along in the United States. You ain't seen nothing yet, okay? The German Social Democratic Party killed thousands of communists. Most of the police officers in cities like Berlin were members of the Social Democratic Party, and they opened fire on Solzhenitsyn, okay, all right. And they opened fire on communists and, killed them, right? And you have to understand the amount of blood. There was a river of blood between German Social Democrats and German communists. These were groups that were enemies, right? And the German Social Democratic Party, it was a party that managed to turn a revolution into a counter-revolution, right? Imagine that you have a revolution. All over the country, workers are rising up in the name of socialism and Marxism. The government falls, and they somehow managed to turn that around and turn that into capitalism. You can understand why all the communists, all the Marxists just hated the Social Democratic Party, the SDP. They thought Karl Kautsky and Ebhardt and Schneiderman, they thought they were ugly traitors. They hated them, right? And they called them social fascists. Communist in word, but fascist in deed, right? And there was a big divide, especially as the 20s went on, because there was mass unemployment in Germany. And the Communist Party became the party of the unemployed Germans, right? They were starving, and the Communist Party would feed them, and they had bread riots where they would go and break the store windows and hand out food and all that. The Communist Party became the party of the bread riots, right? Whereas the Social Democratic Party was the party of labor unions, caffeinated beverage that will remain unnamed. There you go. Yeah, that's all I can say to that. So there was this divide where the communists were the party of the desperately hungry unemployed. The Social Democrats were the party of labor unions in factories. And that divide, continued. And in the 1920s, there were many uprisings led by the German Communist Party that didn't really succeed. I know one of them was named by a guy named Brandler. And then Brandler, his uprising failed, and so he broke away and he formed his own communist party. They were called the Brandlerites. So at one point in the 1920s in Germany, there was argument about what position the German Communist Party should take, right? And the debate was, should they argue that Germany was being oppressed as a nation, or should they simply argue on a class line? And a strong argument could be made that at that point, after Germany had been stripped of its colonies, it was not allowed to have an army, it was subject to all kinds of national humiliation after World War I, that an argument could be made, a very strong argument could be made, that Germany at that point was not simply oppressed, by capitalism, but it was oppressed as a nation, right? And that it was having what you might call a national liberation struggle. The Communist International did not agree with that. There was a small faction within the German Communist Party that argued that Germany was being oppressed as a nation during the 1920s, not simply suffering because of capitalism. And there was disagreement about it. Obviously, the faction that won out, was led by Ernst Thälmann, who was the leader of the German Communist Party, and they did not feel that Germany was oppressed, as as a nation. They felt like Germany was the Germans were workers and they should join arm in arm with their brothers in France and their brothers in Britain, and that they were for a class line, right? And that, that was starting in 1928, the Comintern went into its class against class phase after the Sixth World Congress. And so that was a divide. But yeah, there was a small faction, and that the party in Russia in the 90s, from what I understand, traced some of its heritage back to that faction. Okay, I don't know. Someone's sending me all kinds of questions about Dugin. I don't even know who this Elaine person is, and I've got a lot of other super chats to get back to. And that was the divide. And, an argument could be made that Germany was being oppressed as a nation, but class solidarity was the position that the Communist International took at that time. All right, so coronavirus, ulterior motives. Very clear that they were pushing their ulterior motives. And I worry, the economy is doing very badly, but Amazon is doing great right now. This is David Fox's question about ulterior motives. Amazon is doing great. Amazon is doing great because everyone's ordering things in their home, right? And I worry that this, there's already this issue of people in Japan that they call like house boys, and they're like young men who don't leave their house. And I fear that this could give rise. I worry that there's going to be a lot of people that will just stop going out. And whenever they start lifting these restrictions, they'll just stay in. I worry that we're transitioning to a society where people don't go outside, where people are just staring at webcams all day. I'm really worried about that. And I'm worried that we're transitioning to a work-at-home, stay-at-home society. And that there's already, there's a form of mental illness. I forget what it's called. It's like a phobia where people won't go outside, right? They're just afraid to go outside. And is it agoraphobia? Maybe it's the other one, right? But it has always existed. There have been people that they have the ability to go outside. They're not, disabled or anything, but they just, mental health-wise, they cannot go outside. And I am very worried that this is the USA transitioning. I worry that there will be a lot of people that won't go outside after this. Number one, they'll just get so used to staying home. It's a big problem with like millennials and Generation Z is they don't go outside. And now we have Amazon, Amazon Prime and delivery, and people just won't go outside. That's my fear. I worry about this. And so many people are losing jobs, but at the same time, we have all this artificial intelligence and Uber Eats and all of this. And I worry that we are just going to become a much more antisocial society. And that's not good. For goodness sakes, that is just not good. And the war agenda. What they're doing to Venezuela, pushing anti-China stuff ridiculously. This G20 video summit, the way Mike Pompeo was insisting that this was a, what do you call it? That this was a Wuhan virus and must be the China virus, just trying to amplify international agreements. They're killing Iranians right now. Folks, they are killing Iranians. They are killing Iranians right now. The way that they're escalating sanctions at this time on Iran, preventing Iran from getting the medical supplies it needs. This is criminal. I tweeted out a joint document that was put out today by UN missions, right? It was signed, and it was a number of countries. And I tweeted it out. You can read the whole thing. I screenshotted it and put it on Twitter. I received a press release. China, Cuba, North Korea, Nicaragua, Russia, Syria, and Venezuela. Their UN missions, their UN ambassadors put out a joint document today calling out the United States for what it is doing right now. It is killing people with these sanctions, right? It is killing people with these sanctions. It is merciless. At a time like this, we should have global unity about defeating the virus. But instead, the United States is escalating, just trying to stick the screws in. They're murdering people. To deny medical care at this time, to make it so countries can't get testing equipment at this time, this is a crime against humanity. This is Nuremberg-type stuff that Mike Pompeo is doing, that the Trump administration is doing right now. There should be global outrage about what they are doing to the Iranians, to the Venezuelans, right? While Cuba is sending doctors all over the world, while Russia is sending doctors to Italy, while China is sending doctors all over the world, and China is talking about making a health Silk Road, the U.S. leaders are so committed to their agenda of imperialism and beating down developing countries that they would resort to this. And, I don't know who's sending me these tweets about Dugin, and I don't know what your intentions are, but think about that. If you're one of these people that wants to categorize me in a negative way, right? Think about what the government of the United States is doing at this time, right? At a time when people are dying, there's a global pandemic going on, and they're trying to kill people. Am I the bad guy here? Is Caleb talking on YouTube the enemy here? I mean, really, right? I mean, when Russia is sending medical supplies all over the world, when China is trying to set up a health Silk Road, Cuban doctors are everywhere. This is a crisis facing the global community. And the United States leaders, Mike Pompeo, Trump, all of them are more concerned about defeating their enemies than solving this crisis, and are looking to use this crisis to kill people, to actively kill people. It's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable what they are doing. They have an ulterior agenda. And Jeff Bezos is making out great during all of this, mind you. The stay-at-home economy, Amazon Prime, artificial intelligence. I mean, this is good for certain sections of the ruling class. It's not good for the majority, right? I mean, this is leading to an economic fallout. But for the richest of the rich, this is their moment to beat down their competitors. The fracking companies may be doomed. This could be the end of the frackers. This could very well be the end of the fracking companies. In order for fracking to really be profitable, you need to have at least $40 a barrel. We don't have that right now. This could be the end of the frackers, folks. But tweet this out if you're watching. Make this a bigger conversation. Bring more people on board. Let's have a bigger conversation. Now, another super chat I received was about Ethiopia and the Somalia war. So Ethiopia, right? We know that there was Haile Selassie, who was the emperor of Ethiopia. It was like a Christian empire of Ethiopia, Ethiopia is a country. Haile Selassie is overthrown. You have the rise of the Derg, which is a Marxist-Leninist political party or movement that takes power. It's like the council. It's called the Derg, led by Mengistu. Mengistu is pro-Soviet. And that for a long time, Eritrea had been fighting for independence. Somalia had been fighting for independence. And the United States had been opposing these fights for independence and had been backing Selassie. And so there were Marxist-Leninists in Eritrea and in Somalia and elsewhere who were fighting for their independence. Then there was a big division. When the Derg took power in Ethiopia, there was a big division, right? A lot of the Eritrean independence fighters actually supported the Derg and laid down their guns, right? Some of them clearly did not. The Maoists did not, and China continued supporting them, and the USA began covertly supporting the Eritrean Maoist kind of forces. And similar things happened in Somalia, right? And that the proxy wars that have happened all throughout, throughout Africa, where the U.S. government would back certain forces, like in Angola, the United States backed Jonas Savimbi, the vicious murderer, cannibal, against the MPLA government of Angola. This is horrendous stuff, right? And the way so many weapons were exported, and these long wars were just kept going. The goal of the United States and a lot of these countries wasn't in Angola, right? UNITA and Jonas Savimbi, they were not going to overthrow the MPLA. The MPLA had and still has the overwhelming majority support of the country. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to force Angola to spend all of its resources on a war, to not be able to develop its oil industry, to be dependent on BP, right? That was the goal, right? And the same with these wars in Ethiopia. The goal was not to topple the Derg. The goal was to force Ethiopia to spend all its money on weapons and all of that, to have ugly wars where the country, the Derg was not going to be overthrown, right? The Derg was very strong up until the mid-90s, right? The goal was not to really overthrow the Derg. The goal was to just keep the war going, keep the country in a situation where it just has to keep fighting, where people are dying, where there's instability. Don't let them build socialism in peace. That's the goal, right? Keep the country in a state of war, keep people dying. I mean, Angola was subjected to 27 years of civil war. The United States was supporting the UNITA group, Jonas Savimbi. Horrendous. Ronald Reagan is meeting with this literal cannibal who's going through Angola, murdering people. Horrendous stuff. You can read about all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, that there was, in South Africa, there was a divide between the African National Congress, led by Nelson Mandela, and what was the other group called? Now their name is escaping me. The Pan-African Congress, the PAC, right? And, there were killings where members of the Pan-African Congress would murder members of the African National Congress. And you read about this. There's a book written by a British general. I forget his name, but it's called Gangs and Counter-Gangs. And it talks about how when the British were fighting in Kenya, there was the Land and Freedom Army of the 1950s. There was an uprising in Kenya by this Land and Freedom Army. And, these people in this Land and Freedom Army were fighting the British for independence, land and freedom. They were called the Mau Mau, was their nickname, the Mau Mau. And they were fighting for their independence. And the British realized that they had this kind of optics problem because most of their soldiers were white and the Mau Mau, the Land and Freedom Army, were black. And that the Kenyan population would support would openly support the Mau Mau. So they started setting up counter gangs, and they would get captured Mau Mau and set them up to go out and pretend they were Mau Mau and do intelligence work. And they found out that it's more effective to manipulate revolutionaries against each other. They would find ethnic rivals of the Mau Mau, for example, and they would say, well, you're now the Kenyan Liberation Army, and you hate the British just as much as I do. You hate the British just as much as I do. But the Mau Mau are phonies, right? Right? I mean, someone's asking me about George Galloway talking with Steve Bannon. Ask George Galloway about that. I mean, I don't know what you're getting at here. And this was a way. How do you divide revolutionary forces in Kenya? And it worked, right? And they did the same thing in Northern Ireland. In fact, the guy who wrote the book Gangs and Counter Gangs was actually sued by Irish folks who were survivors of bombings because the British had been covertly supporting the Mau Mau, not the Mau Mau, the Ulster separatists and the hardcore Protestant groups in Northern Ireland. So, there you go. Solzhenitsyn is like the favorite anti-communist of Western capitalism. He's a writer, Gulag Archipelago. And he was a Russian Orthodox conservative who was very, very opposed to the Soviet government. He's very loved by anti-communists. His writings are considered, central. What's interesting is that a lot of these anti-communists will cover up some of his other views, like the fact that he was very anti-Semitic, like the fact that he was, he made pro-fascist statements during World War II. A lot of anti-communists will like to cover that up because it doesn't really fit their narrative. But he's like an icon in the United States. He's considered just sacred, and people find it to be very profound, and it's this anti-totalitarianism. What's interesting is that people will put Solzhenitsyn, who was definitely not an advocate of liberal democracy. He, admired the Tsar. He wanted the Tsar to return in Russia. He was very friendly to Francisco Franco, the fascist dictator in Spain. Very anti-Semitic and all of that. People will put him in the same category as Hannah Arendt and George Orwell, and that's very interesting because George Orwell and Hannah Arendt were very liberal, very Western, but they served the same end, which was fighting to overthrow socialism and overthrow the Soviet Union, demonize Marxism. It's very interesting, this category of anti-totalitarianism. Ayn Rand, you read Anthem by Ayn Rand. How different is that from 1984? I mean, Ayn Rand and George Orwell, was kind of a social democrat, liberal, and Ayn Rand is, this far, free market capitalism is utopia, but their view is basically the same. It's this middle class view, right? That there's a boot stomping on the human face, right? And that, divide and conquer. Divide Africa and the world by imperialists, how much they use to divide the left organizations. I agree with you, absolutely. And that playing people against each other, manipulating each other. And with social media now, it used to be during the age of COINTELPRO in the 60s or whatever, they would write letters, right? We know that the FBI wrote letters to the Black Panthers from, Ron Karenga and the United Slaves Organization, the US organization, right? And the FBI wrote letters to the United Slaves Organization from the Black Panthers, and that these were like printed letters designed to incite hostility between the two organizations, right? That happened. COINTELPRO was like, how do we divide, right? There's this black nationalist group called United Slaves, led by Ron Karenga. There's the Black Panther Party. How do we divide these two groups against each other? Well, we send them letters signed by one group, insulting and threatening, and we play them against each other, right? That was COINTELPRO. Well, think about how much easier it is to do that kind of thing with the internet now, right? You don't have to print a letter. You don't have to stick something in the mail. You don't have to fake a postmark. I mean, I always wonder. I see a lot of stuff on social media. You never know. I mean, you see these accounts on Twitter. They got like 4 followers. And is it a real person? Probably. Maybe. Who knows? Right? A lot of stuff on social media. You got to take it with a grain of salt. You never really know. And that there's huge efforts to play people against each other, right? To just, divide and conquer, make it so no one can really have any sustainable friendship or alliance, escalate people's differences with each other, make people hostile to one another, divide people against each other, and that's really common. I mean, the amount of trolls I usually get in the comments here saying all kinds of crazy stuff, I always wonder now, is that the government? Maybe, maybe not, probably not, right? There's just, the internet's full of weirdos and all of that, but you never know, right? And that COINTELPRO stuff where it's divide and conquer, get people suspicious of each other, play up people's anxieties against each other, that stuff, I believe that nowadays with the internet, it's way easier to do than it used to be. And, at the moment where I was departing from the political group I was a member of, the amount of stuff going on around on the internet blew my mind. And I wonder about some of that stuff. I don't want to get into too many specifics here. Just like I wonder about these comments where this person just wants me to go on and on about National Bolshevism. Why? I have nothing to do with it. That's not my viewpoint. But they're trying, you wonder, right? And there was stuff going around on the internet, right? About, all kinds of stuff going around. And you just have to be suspicious of it, right? You have to be suspicious of it. And one thing I would encourage people to do, I would really encourage people to do, is you never really want to be, you never want to be a dupe, right? Mao himself, he said that if you want to know what a pear tastes like, you must bite into it. Go to the original source. Go to the original source. Don't let anyone tell you what someone else is like. Don't let anyone misrepresent someone else's writings and all that. Return to source. Go to the original document, right? In college, when I was studying in academia, they always said it's important to use primary sources. And I would agree. It's very important to use primary sources, right? There's a whole lot of, well, don't you know so-and-so once said, and don't you know, no, return to source. Engage with the material yourself. And I would also urge people to not fall into baiting, right? Don't criticize someone because of a label that they have. Criticize someone for what they say or what they do, right? Don't go for a label. Just because you can put a label on somebody, right, does not mean that what they're saying is necessarily wrong. Find out what they're actually saying and engage with it. The labels don't really matter, right? Labels are really kind of stupid, in my opinion, right? Because a lot of times these words, and I actually wanted to talk about this. This is one thing I've been meaning to talk about. What is a Trotskyist? Right? I mean, I'm going to debate a Trotskyist later. But I say I'm going to debate a Trotskyist. Well, you talk to somebody from there's a lot of people in DSA that call themselves Trotskyists, right? Well, talk to the Spartacist League, right? Those people both claim to be Trotskyists. What they will think is about 100 miles apart. They both say, well, they're Trotskyists, right? The Trotskyist label doesn't tell you everything you need to know. It means they like a certain historical figure. But the Spartacist League and Trotskyists and DSA couldn't be further apart, right? But they're both wearing that same label. What does that label mean? Maoist, right? There's a label, right? Right? You know what I mean? The Revolutionary Communist Party. They're Maoists, right? Well, talk to somebody from the RCP and then talk to somebody from the Freedom Road Socialist Organization or the Liberation Road. Couldn't be further apart. Right? One group is Revolution Nothing Less and Bobavakia, and the other group is voting for the Democrats. Couldn't be further apart, but they're both Maoists. That shows that a label doesn't tell you what you need to know, right? If you ask me, what is this group? And I just say, they're Maoists. Well, what does that tell you? That means they like a certain historical figure. but how do they interpret that historical figure? What do they advocate in the current moment? What do they do? What do they think about certain geopolitical forces that exist today? It doesn't tell you anything, right? You say so and so is a democratic socialist. So and so is an anarchist, right? I mean, I know anarchists who vote. I know people who campaigned for Bernie Sanders, for goodness sakes, who call themselves anarchists, right? But anarchists aren't supposed to vote. Caleb, anarchists just believe. Well, not these labels, right? These labels are not really all inclusive, right? They can be useful in some ways. But return to source. Again, don't read what Maoists say. Read what Mao said. Learn from Mao's life. Study Mao's life. Study Mao's writings. Look at different Maoist groups and look at how they interpret what Mao did. Then you're actually learning, right? Trotsky, right? I have studied Trotsky. I've studied his life. There you go. Now, Nick Gallo says identity politics divides the working class. I would agree with that for the most part. But, to be fair, okay, so when we're talking about identity politics, what do we mean, right? Is it simply, there's one form of identity politics that I think should be respected, right? If somebody who is African American wants to organize the African American community on that basis and say, I'm an African American, I want to organize my community, I respect that 100%. If someone's Latino and they say, you know what, I'm Latino, I want to organize around Latino issues in the Latino community, I respect that 100%. Women too, right? Women say, you know what, I'm a woman, I want to organize around women's issues, I respect that. That kind of identity politics I don't have a problem with. I think when people say identity politics and they talk about it dividing the working class, you get this line that class politics is fascist. Right? And I hear that all the time, right? Working class is just a code word for Nazi. It's fascist. It's racist to say working class. Working class is this belief that if you ever talk about the class struggle, that's offensive. People that don't ever want to talk about economics, they never, working class struggle, economy, capitalism, what? They've never heard of that. They just want to sit there and talk about, movies and how this movie is offensive to gay people or this movie is offensive to transgender people, or didn't you hear about how there's this new interpretation of how some of the, this celebrity said something to this week that's racist or something, and it's not interesting to me. I'm sorry. I respect people's right to organize in their community, and I didn't become a communist so I can talk about what movies are offensive, and I just the doctrine of Marxism, right? The class struggle, dialectical materialism, historical materialism, socialism, the dictatorship of the proletariat, overproduction, all these concepts we talk about, they get lost, right? There's, you talk about oppression Olympics, says Nikki Gallo. Well, I know what you're getting at. But it's worse than that. It's like you're not allowed to talk about Marxism. In leftist circles, you don't talk about Marxism. You talk about, what is trendy among liberals these days. And I'm not one of those people. I'm interested in actual Marxism. I've studied William Z. Foster. I study Gus Hall. I study Huey Newton and what Huey Newton wrote about. And, the national question and what, nations fighting for independence is very important. Women's liberation and the way gender relations go on in society and gender oppression and patriarchy, that stuff is important. I'm not going to belittle that kind of thing. And if you're trying to get me to belittle any particular group and their history and their struggle and what they've gone through, I'm not going to do that. I'm just saying that there is this thing called Marxism, right? There is this science of understanding the world, and that can't be neglected. And talking about that doesn't make you a racist and doesn't make you a sexist, doesn't make you a closet fascist, right? That you can talk about, the science of Marxism-Leninism, about scientific socialism, and that should be allowed, for goodness sakes. And just because we won't focus on this kind of liberal, I don't know what you want to call it, SJWism or whatever, and that in leftist circles, you're not allowed. And there's this whole thing, right, that it makes you it's autistic if you're interested in Marxism. You know that, right? If you've ever read Marx, if you actually know, Marxist theory, that's autistic, and that's white male. Only white men do that. Well, that's not true. Right? You read the Black Panther literature. Huey Newton understood Marxism and dialectical materialism more than anybody, right? Read some of these amazing Black revolutionaries. Read the Green Book, from Gaddafi, right? An African revolutionary. I mean, this notion that only white people are interested in Marxist ideas. I would say that the 1881 to World War I is important to the USA. Debs, I would agree, right? I would agree that that period is very, very important, right? In the 1880s, you had the rise of populism and the People's Party in the United States. That was like a pre-Marxist movement. It was like small farmers, and they were rising and they were emerging. And then socialism kind of came out of populism, right? The populist movement was divided because not all of them were racist, right? There was a big division, and they were people that had been in the Republican Party, big supporters of Lincoln. As the Republican Party became an imperialist party and a party of big business rather than a party of small farmers, these small farmers started the People's Party, and they were for, they wanted a silver standard instead of a gold standard. They were for nationalized banking and nationalization of railroads. And they were against the monopolies. That's what they talked about. They hated monopolies and monopolists. And that was what they were opposed to. And then, William Jennings Bryan came along, who was a Democrat, who kind of embraced them. And the Democratic Party was racist. I mean, they were the party of Jim Crow in the South. So a lot of the populists started becoming racists. And so the populist movement moved into the Democratic Party and became racist because of that. And when it became racist, it became weak because racism is a tool to divide the workers, and it's anti-working class. You read Marx before Marxists. About an earlier topic, read Marx before Marxists. And I would agree. Sami, I would agree. However, and I get flack for saying this, but I would encourage people to read Marx, sure. But I would also encourage people to read like a textbook, right? I have learned so much by reading textbooks. There's an old Soviet textbook called Fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism. Read that and then go read Marx. Or read William Z. Foster and his History of the Three Internationals and then go read Marx. You have to read stuff like that in context. If you read these polemics by Lenin, these polemics by Trotsky and all of that, or these polemics by Marx, and you don't understand the context, it can get very confusing. There are many people, who were reading Lenin who don't know what the Second International was. Well, you need to know what the Second International was to read What Is to Be Done, right? You need to get background knowledge. So, I would encourage people to return to source, right? Read the actual material for yourself, yes, but also get a textbook. Get like an overview textbook, right? Get one of those introductory textbooks that will kind of guide you at the same time, because it can get very frustrating. I remember being in high school when I opened up Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and was like, whoa, what? I tried to read What Is to Be Done in high school, and I was like, what? I thought it was so funny. I remember reading, back in the day they had encyclopedias, and I remember reading in the encyclopedia about Lenin, reading all about Lenin. And it said Lenin's, most groundbreaking pamphlet was called What Is to Be Done. And based on the encyclopedia article, somehow I got it in my mind that What Is to Be Done was like an agitational pamphlet about how to overthrow the Tsar. It's like, what do we do? Overthrow the Tsar. That's what I thought it meant. So I remember I went and I started reading What Is to Be Done, and my head almost exploded. I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. I was like, what in the world is he talking about? Freedom of criticism, and what in the world? I was like, this is like gobbledygook, and all these Russian words, raboche, deleo, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It was like reading Greek, right? Well, years later, I read What Is to Be Done, and then I actually got some very good advice. Someone recommended reading What Is to Be Done backwards. Right? Now, it sounds crazy, right? It sounds like, listening to your records backwards like the Beatles. But actually, it was very good advice, because the way What Is to Be Done is written is it's written about a very specific argument among Russian social democrats. And then he expands outward, and then he expands outward, and then he expands outward. And the final section of What Is to Be Done gives an entire history of the Russian Marxist movement. So at the time he was writing it, it made sense, right? Like, he's going to talk about this very specific argument that's on everyone's mind, and then he's going to expand it outward, and expand it outward, and expand it outward. But if you're reading it 100 years later, it actually makes a lot of sense to read it backwards. Read the entire history of Russian Marxism, then read, this part, then read this part, and then get to the very specific part. It's actually What Is to Be Done, from reading it in our time, actually makes a lot more sense to read it, the chapters, in backward order, right? And that was very good advice. And if you actually want to try to grasp what he's saying, what is to be done is a very good text, because Lenin, at that point, he's arguing with, there's this broad Russian Marxist movement that anyone can join, right? As long as you agree with three major principles and you pay your dues, anyone can be a Russian Marxist. He's arguing that instead they need to form a vanguard party, right? A vanguard party that will be a tribune of the people. Sami, good, yeah. What is to be done, Leo Tolstoy, is also good, right? Well, it was a novel, right? And that's why he even named it What is to be Done, because that was the name of a popular novel at the time. And I don't think it was Leo Tolstoy, I think it was somebody else, but it was a popular, like, science fiction-y novel, and so he gave it that name to kind of have the same name. But, it was this pamphlet that Lenin wrote, this very long pamphlet, where he's arguing that for the creation of a vanguard party. And he argues against terrorism, for example. At the time in Russia, there were these group of people who called themselves the terrorists. And they thought the way to make socialism in Russia was to go around bombing and assassinating people. And he writes very strongly about why terrorism is incorrect. And in the pamphlet, he argues against what he calls bowing to spontaneity. Bowing to spontaneity. And he talks about how when the workers in Russia have a strike and protest, the communists run over and follow behind them. Right? And they're having a strike and protest. Well, yeah, we support that. And that instead, the communists should be leading the workers, right? They shouldn't be bowing to spontaneity. Whatever spontaneously happens among the workers, the communists just kind of follow behind it. Well, no, he's saying you should be not doing tailism. He calls that tailism. You tail after the masses, right? The masses feel a certain way. You run up to them and say, I feel that way too. I'm a communist. Well, he's saying, no, that's tailism. He's saying instead, they should be ahead. They should be one step ahead of the workers, pushing the workers to do more radical things, right? He talks about, interestingly, the concepts, two big concepts in What is to be Done, is he makes the differentiation between agitation and propaganda. Agitation and propaganda. Fascinating, right? Now, he uses those two words, agitation and propaganda, very differently than they are used in the modern vocabulary, right? In modern vocabulary, we just think of propaganda as stuff that's trying to brainwash you. Agitation is stuff trying to make you mad. Well, there's a specific definition in Lenin's writing to both of those terms, and he talks about agitation is material that is just designed to intensify the class struggle, right? He says, agitators, right? Those, in every workplace you have the agitator, he says, which is the person who, when something doesn't go right, they get mad at the boss and they stir up the other workers, the agitator. And he says to the Bolshevik party, they should find the agitator in every factory, right? And agitation doesn't really have a big political content. It's just kind of outrage against injustice, agitation. And Lenin's saying you should agitate about everything. He talks about the flogging of peasants when they are flogging peasants for not paying their taxes or whatever. You should agitate around that. Working conditions, agitate around it, right? That suppression of democratic rights in Russia, agitate, right? Agitate, he said, to the masses, to the broad masses, but propagate to the advanced, right? Propaganda is different, Lenin says, than agitation. Agitation is just kind of stirring people up. Propaganda is teaching people Marxism and teaching Marxist ideology. And What is to be Done is written on the assumption that the overwhelming majority of people in Russia will never really be capable of understanding Marxism. That's how it's written, right? It's basically written on this this understanding that Marxism and Marxist ideology is only reserved, it's only reserved for, the vanguard, the advanced, right? People who can join the vanguard party, can give the whole of their lives to the revolutionary movement. Those are the only people we really want to teach Marxism to. Everybody else, we just want to agitate. We want to stir them up. And What is to be Done, I recommend reading it, right? And he argues against terrorism, he argues against tailism and bowing to spontaneity. Someone in the chat said movementism, and I think that's a more accurate name, and it does certainly remind me of certain political groups I could name, but it is a more widespread trend nowadays, right? Of movementism, tailism, bowing to spontaneity. But overall, I would say that some of it needs to be reconsidered. I mean, the Vanguard Party model, right? I have questions about it because I think in this day and age where all of our beliefs are all over the internet, right? It's not a secret The Leninist method involves a lot of, there's almost like an idea of lying to people, right? It's like, well, we're just going to agitate, and then we're going to have this secret club for people who know what it's really all about. And there's a whole history of that in Russia, right? There's a whole history, right? About the Decembrists. It was a secret society formed to overthrow Tsar Nicholas I, and they attempted a palace coup against him. We know about the Old Believers. At one point, there were people in the Russian Orthodox Church who held on to the religious beliefs that some of the reforms, when one of the czars reformed the Catholic Church, and and thoughts on the state and revolution, sure, and that the Russian Orthodox Church and coming out of even the bourgeois revolutions in Europe, Freemasonry had been a very big part of the American Revolution and of the French Revolution and the British Revolutions, right? Is that the bourgeoisie, when they were organizing to overthrow feudalism and talking about science and not believing the Catholic Church, that they often formed like kind of secret societies, right? And these kind of underground secret societies to carry out their will, right? A lot of the founding fathers of the United States were part of Freemasonry. And that Lenin, when he built his vanguard party in Russia, the Bolsheviks were very much a conspiratorial, secret society. Basically, that's what they were, right? I mean, it was this group, and they went around agitating to the masses, and then they would find people they wanted to recruit and propagate to them. But it was kind of operating on the understanding that their beliefs were not for public consumption, right? Their beliefs were too complicated. Most people were illiterate. Most people were uneducated. Most people wouldn't really understand it. So we're going to form this kind of secret society that will carry out a revolution. And I think that view of doing things is a little bit outdated. Now, there's some good things about it, right? I do think we need people to be fanatical, right? I don't agree. There's this woman who's on the internet. She's very critical of DSA. I forget her name. She's Irish. She's a writer. She wrote Kill the Normies. And I agree with a lot of her criticism of the left and identity politics, but at the same point, I don't agree with her when she says that you shouldn't make socialism a central part of your life. We need fanatics, right? We need people who are really dedicated to socialism. We need people who really, truly believe in this and have studied every socialist movement. There's nothing wrong with having fanatics, right? And so Lenin's right when he talks about we need people who will give the whole of their lives. We need professional revolutionaries. He's absolutely right about that. I do not disagree with a word of that. However, do I disagree with, I think that this concept of a conspiratorial vanguard secret society, not into it, right? I think it's a little outdated, right? That the Masonic way of doing politics, and this applies to religion too, right? They talk about Gnosticism, right? Certain religions that are set up, like Kabbalah, right? Kabbalah is set up this way. Scientology is set up this way, where it's like you can't just know it all, right? The beliefs are not available to everybody. There's like a hierarchy where you gradually learn more. You pay more money, you're in the group longer, you recruit people, and then they tell you more. And then you're in the group longer, and they pay you more money, and they recruit you, and they tell you more. And it's like the secrets of the group are like you gradually advance within the group, and you gradually learn what the group is all about. That's the Masonic organizing style. Right? And people talk about Gnosticism, the Gnostic Christians, the early Christian church. There was a wing of them called the Gnostics. They operated that way. They had like secret gospels, and you had to move up that way. Kabbalah, which is kind of like, it's like a form of Judaism. It's like a Jewish mystical thing that Madonna is into. It's like that. Scientology is like that. That's not a good way of doing things. And nowadays, with the freedom of information that we have with the internet, it doesn't really work anymore, right? People just Google it, right? And ex-members post everything on the internet. You can't keep secrets. And this idea that you're gonna hoodwink the workers into having a revolution, right? The workers are gonna think they're protesting for 15 an hour, but by the end of the day, we're gonna take over the government. Tricked you. Not gonna work. Not gonna work. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to hoodwink people into having a revolution, right? The palace coup strategy, or that's not how things work, right? Actually, nowadays, there's probably more potential for democratic participation and involvement than ever before. People are more informed about politics than I've ever seen in my lifetime. People pull out their phones, they Google stuff. There's people that are certainly willfully ignorant, but now ignorance requires more willfulness than it used to, right? Nowadays, the accessibility to information is massive. So a lot of the vanguard party assumptions, a lot of the way, Lenin writes, you should study it. I'm telling you to study it, right? Don't diss it. And that's one thing that annoys me. One thing that really annoys me is when people revise things without knowing what they're revising. You can't be a revisionist if you don't know what you're revising. Go and study what is to be done. Read it, understand it, and then come back to me and say, okay, Caleb, you might be right and that some things are outdated, or you might be wrong, I think it's 100% good, but actually go and study it, right? I am very annoyed in the universities now. A lot of people learn leftism, and they take a class and they learn that Lenin's wrong. They never learn what Lenin believed. My God, this Dugan guy won't stop, will he? I hear Eurasianism is popular in Brazil. Oh, I don't know. Do you think Eurasianism will grow in popularity? Maybe. The way I understand it, the way I understand Eurasianism is that it's more observations. It's not a political movement, the way I understand it. It's kind of an observation about history, about geopolitics, but I didn't know it's popular in Brazil. I wasn't aware of that. But there you go. Maybe it'll grow. You should understand it, right? You should understand it. It's an important school of thought in the world today, with the rise of Russia and China as the Eurasian alternative. And I call them in my writing the Eurasian alternative to Western capitalism. You should understand Eurasianism. There you go. But there's a lot of that I disagree with, and whatever. The State and Revolution. I was asked about The State and Revolution by Nick Gallo. That's a book that Lenin wrote in 1917. On the verge of taking power, I believe. And it was a book that a lot of anarchists actually particularly like, but it's the Marxist teaching on the concept of the state. And in it, he talks about Karl Marx's beliefs on the state. He talks about the Paris Commune of 1871, some of the lessons that can be learned from the Paris Commune. He talks about what a socialist state will look like, and then he talks about the belief that the state will eventually wither away, the goal of communism. It's actually a very good text. I recommend it. The State and Revolution is a very important text. It's probably, I said to a political science professor one time, I said, it's interesting. In none of our political science classes, not comparative politics, not political theory, none of our classes do we ever read The State and Revolution, which is, the Leninist teaching on government and how government works. But, at one point, 2/3 of the human race lived under governments that were based on that book. And I remember my professor said, that is a very strong argument for studying that book. And I said, well, think about it, right? That one, China, the Chinese government is based on that book, The State and Revolution. The Soviet government was based on that book, right? The Cuban government is based on that book. The government of Angola is based on that book. The government of Vietnam is based on that book. The government of Venezuela, they're studying, and it's based on that book. The government of Nicaragua is based on that book. The government of Namibia, SWAPO, they're based on that book. All over the world. At one point, 2/3 of the human race lived under governments that were based on that book, that understanding of the state and how governments operate. That is that book. It is an exposition. Lenin didn't come up with most of it. It's an exposition that Lenin is writing on the theory of the state, right? Of how a government operates, right? And every socialist country, every country led by Marxist-Leninists, its constitution is based on, the theories that Lenin puts forward in that book. Mozambique, Ethiopia. I think Ethiopia still has the constitution from the Derg, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think they have a new constitution. I know that they don't have a socialist government anymore, but I think that their constitution was written in the time when they did. There are many governments around the world. It is, probably The State and Revolution by Lenin is probably one of the most important texts in the history of political science. I'm not exaggerating there. And even if I didn't agree with a word of it, I would still think that, because it's a fact, right? Every Marxist-Leninist government in the world is based on that book. Afghanistan, when they had the People's Democratic Republic, not anymore, obviously, since the Taliban and then the U.S. invasion. But at one point, Afghanistan's government was based on that book. It is the Leninist theory of the state. Right? India was never socialist, no. But it is the Leninist theory of the state, right? And it informed how governments were set up, right? Little known fact, you'll know it if you watch this channel, and it's The State and Revolution by Lenin. Little known fact, but the birthday of Lenin was in 1970, right? All right, the 100th anniversary of his birth. Lenin was born in 1870. The anniversary of his birth was in 1970. And on every continent, South America, Europe, Asia, right? People celebrated Africa there were huge parades and celebrations for the anniversary of Lenin's birth. Communists all over the world celebrated it. And in the United States, the way they distracted from those huge celebrations, the way they avoided having conversations about Lenin and Leninism in American media, what they did was they declared the first Earth Day. Look it up. The first Earth Day was on Lenin's 100th birthday. And ever since then, every year on Lenin's birthday in the United States, we celebrate Earth Day. Bet you didn't know that. But it was a way to distract. From Lenin and the celebration of the life of Lenin. I think that's fascinating, personally. But yeah, if anyone has any more super chats. And Earth Day, right? Now, I'm for the environment. I believe in global warming. It's a big problem. I think we need to take action to protect the environment and not let corporations do just whatever they want. But the environmental movement is largely anti-Marxist. The leaders of it are, right? I think that the environmental question is a strong argument for Marxism and socialism, but the people running, the World Wildlife Fund and the Audubon Society and those folks certainly don't think that, right? The World Wildlife Fund was started by members of the British royal family. They're Malthusians for the most part. Folks at Greenpeace, folks at the Sierra Club, those folks are not Marxists in any conceivable way. They think there's too many people on the earth. I've seen this meme going around, where people say coronavirus is great because it's getting Mother Nature in order. This is unbelievable. That's sick thinking. Sick thinking. Sick thinking. If you think coronavirus is a good thing because there's too many people and we're just messing up Mother Nature, you're a sick person. You're a very sick person. That is demented thinking. Absolutely demented thinking, right? Coronavirus is a disaster, right? Humans are not a cancer. Human beings, the population has expanded exponentially. That's eco-fascism, says Tommy Farras, and you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right? Yes, there is an environmental concern. We need to organize the economy rationally so that we are using resources in a sensible and rational way. I'm totally for that. But come on, folks. Come on, right? Come on, folks. Right? Malthusianism is a sick, disastrous way of thinking, right? The British royal family, Robert Thomas Malthus, the father of Malthusianism, this stuff is not good. Not good thinking at all. Do you think Turkey is embracing Eurasianism? No, I do not, right? I don't think Erdogan is embracing Eurasianism. I think that Turkey, politically, Turkey was very solidly, Turkey is a member of NATO, for goodness sakes. It was very solidly with the USA under Obama, and now Turkey is, there's division. Now, are you familiar with John Bellamy Foster and his climate work? I've seen some of that work. He wrote, the Green Left Alliance, and there's some stuff in Australia, and they've given particular attention to the ecology issue. But even some of that, I'm not totally in agreement with. Some of the ecological, some of the stuff of eco-leftists, I'm not fully in agreement with some of what they say, right? Where they say that the big mistake, Marx advocated expanding production and expanding the means of production, and that was a mistake. I don't agree with that. I believe in technological progress. I don't believe, some of the stuff where they talk about, using our resources and, out of balance, and some of that is very dangerous, right? Whenever you start rejecting historical progress, whenever the goal is to make people poorer because that's somehow more moral and better for the environment, you're in a dangerous territory, right? You're in a very dangerous territory. We need more funding for science. We need to get beyond fossil fuels. We need to have a fuel source that's higher than fossil fuels. We do not need something worse. But folks, now is the time, if you haven't subscribed, to hit that subscribe button, to hit that like button if you haven't liked it already, and tweet this out. Make this a bigger conversation. Hey, I'm basically quarantined here, right? I never had coronavirus, but I can't go outside. This is New York City. This is the center of the epidemic. I've been stuck inside for days, and I'm back on YouTube Live, and I'm just going to keep going. But there aren't as many of us here as there usually are tonight. So make this a bigger conversation. I think people are not getting notifications, so be sure to hit that bell to make sure you're getting the notifications, because I have no problem just talking away. I'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. Keep sending me super chats. I've got other things I can talk about. Just taking a gulp of water. So there you go. I didn't get a notification, says Sami. See, that's what I'm telling you. So be sure to tweet this out. Make this a bigger conversation. Bring people along. Poland, yes, they just convicted leaders of the Polish Communist Party of, quote, promoting totalitarianism. I kid you not. I kid you not. They've been convicted of promoting totalitarianism. Should read about this. Unbelievable, right? Huge suppression of their free speech. In fact, the trial, their conviction wasn't even based on anything they actually said. They couldn't find them promoting totalitarianism. They had like an expert witness who said, well, this is their intention based on what he knew about communism. Very scary stuff. Now, they're not being sent to prison. I understand they're getting some kind of fine. This is still unbelievable, right? People being put on trial for believing in communism, right? This is the U.S. NATO ally. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Oh, boy, folks. Looking Backward, Edward Bellamy. That's an interesting, it's a socialist novel that was published in the United States in like the 1870s or 1880s, I believe. It's Edward Bellamy, and it's, this guy is kind of a rich man, and he's building a house, and there's labor disputes and strikes, and he's angry at the unions, and he hates unions, and he gets hypnotized, and he goes to sleep. He's having trouble sleeping because he's so stressed out about all the labor unions and class struggle, and so he has a hypnotist hypnotize him so he can go to sleep. And then he goes to sleep, and then he wakes up, and he's actually slept for, 100 years or until the year 2000. He wakes up in the year 2000, and the USA is a socialist paradise. And so he spends the book going around this futuristic socialist USA and learning about what it's like. It was a best-selling book. It was a huge, huge popular book in the 1800s in the United States. Edward Bellamy was the author, and people loved it so much they formed Bellamy clubs all around the country, and they eventually started calling themselves the nationalist clubs and the nationalist movement. It was a big current in the United States. And it's funny, I read Looking Backward in high school because in my history textbook, it mentioned it, and I thought I would go read it. And I listened to the audiobook while I was doing chores around my house. I remember, I was like cleaning the living room of my parents, or my home that I grew up in, which was owned by my parents, and I was listening to narration of Edward Bellamy on book on tape, those old cassette tapes, and I was listening to Edward Bellamy. And I remember, what's interesting is that Edward Bellamy's cousin, Francis Bellamy, was actually the author of the Pledge of Allegiance. So I think that's kind of fascinating. The book it's dated, right? For example, it's very sexist. Women are not equal to men in this futuristic society. It was written at a time when women couldn't even vote. And at the time, it's saying things that are very progressive, but it's like women aren't allowed to be judges, if I remember correctly, in this future socialist society, and their votes don't count as much as men or something. It's very sexist book. And what's interesting, it's very religious too. Edward Bellamy's future socialist America is super Christian, right? And religion's a big part of it. And that's kind of interesting as well. At one point in the book, I thought this was hilarious at the time, and I remember in college we did actually read it again. In one of my political science classes, we did read the book when I was in college. So I'd already read it in high school, but we read it again. And what I remember was there was a chapter where they take him to a museum, in this particular museum, they take him around and they're showing him like the history of how the United States became socialist. And they show him, they have a display of some guy with a red flag, and it said, in order to, everyone knew socialism was the answer, but in order to hold off socialism, the capitalists paid provocateurs to go around and preach anarchism. And it's like saying that, the dangerous revolutionaries went. And it's interesting because, Francis Bellamy, who was the author of the Pledge of Allegiance, was the cousin of Edward Bellamy, and he was a Baptist minister who was an adherent to this nationalist movement started by by Edward Bellamy, the author of Looking backward. And, I mean, it was, the Pledge of Allegiance that was written by Francis Bellamy. The under God part was not added until the 1950s, interestingly enough, right? It was in the 1950s they added under God. The Knights of Columbus, the Roman Catholic fraternal association, had a petition campaign to add under God to the Pledge of Allegiance. But originally, the Pledge of Allegiance, it was, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And, Francis Bellamy wrote that. And interestingly, he took the words. It was a combination of, in all the southern states, if you had fought for the Confederacy, in order to get your voting rights back, you had to take an oath of loyalty to the United States. And so that's where he got the idea. And the line, one nation, under God, or not under God, that wasn't in there, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It was meant to be an ideal. But if you think about it, it was a dig. It was the ultimate rejection of the Confederacy. So we're one nation, not many separate nations, not independent states, just united in a federal government, not states' rights, one nation, indivisible, like no more civil war, no more secession, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, i.e., not slavery. Right? It was, I surrender. It was, you were saying, I am no longer a Confederate when you took that oath. One nation, indivisible, like no secession, liberty and justice for all, i.e., no slavery. And one nation. Mind you, nation is different than country. Nation is a nationality, right? So you're saying that people of darker skin are the same nationality as you, right? Just like Britons are all Britons, French are all French, Americans, be they white or black, are one nation, right? We in the United States are one nation. It was a very bold, dramatic thing, and it was inspired. I mean, these nationalist clubs in the United States were inspired by the nationalist revolts that were happening all over Europe in 1848. The spring of nations. That's where the Communist Manifesto comes from. In Germany and France and Hungary and Britain and all these places, you have these mass rebellions of people demanding the creation of modern nation states, right? And 1848 in Germany, one of the participants in the 1848 German Revolution was Karl Marx and the Communist League. That was an armed faction. Do you know much about Amilcar Cabral? And Guinea-Bissau. I know some about it. I've read some of that stuff. I don't know in depth about it. I should know more about it. But yeah, the nationalist clubs in the United States, I mean, that was a big thing. And, at that point, nationalism was viewed as very progressive, right? Because, feudalism was the feeling in Europe, right? And serfs and principalities and different kingdoms. But the creation of a modern nation state in which, you had a democratic republic where people could vote for their leaders was considered to be very radical, right? Nicolas Maduro indictment. Yes, thank you, Shaniqua, and I'm going to get to that. So I don't know if folks saw this, but they have indicted Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, the socialist leader of Venezuela, for the crime of narco-terrorism. That's the charge. And they're offering $15 million for apprehending Nicolas Maduro. And the charge is narco-terrorism. And the indictment actually says they believe they're charging Nicolas Maduro with conspiring to, quote, flood the United States with cocaine. Folks, the United States was flooded with cocaine in the 1980s. And it wasn't by Nicolas Maduro. Folks should go see the movie American Made, starring Tom Cruise. Yeah. Nicolas Maduro, flooded the United States with cocaine. Is cocaine even popular these days? I mean, I don't use drugs. I don't associate with many people who do. But my understanding is that heroin is the big drug nowadays. I mean, if they really wanted to get him, shouldn't they charge him with, conspiring to flood the United States with heroin? I mean, the USA has been flooded with cocaine in the 80s, right? It's well documented. Gary Webb, it's well documented that the CIA was involved in the drug trade, in bringing cocaine to the United States throughout the 1980s. At the same time, the war on drugs was being pushed by the Reagan administration. Um, the CIA was flooding the United States with cocaine and the crack epidemic, and we know all about that. So, what? I mean, I saw that indictment, I said, what? And we remember Noriega, right? He was somebody who had been aligned with the United States, a military strongman put into power by the United States in Panama, who became a populist. As the United States started to turn against him, he became a leftist and became even more radical. And he started doing progressive and socialistic things. So the USA invaded Panama in the 1990s. And what was their allegation? They said Noriega is sending drugs to the United States. I mean, you know, it's weird. It's like, again, it's flashback to the 80s. Every time I start talking about Venezuela, right? Who's that guy they have? The guy, the weird looking guy, Elliot Abrams, right? And then they've got, John Bolton with his mustache. I'm John Bolton, and Mike Pompeo. And it's like flashback to the 80s. It's like they don't have any new ideas. This is like an 80s Reagan era crowd of people. And it's like they're fighting the Sandinistas. I mean, the Sandinistas are back in power in Nicaragua, and they're fighting the Cold War. They used to have a whole division of U.S. Study, right? You talk about the Cold War University. I think they had at Harvard, and they used to talk about Sovietology, right? Sovietology, they used to call it Sovietology. It was like people who studied the Soviet Union obsessively, and they were in that school of Sovietology. And that's where a lot of these neocons come out of. Is they were Sovietologists, and they studied and they learned to speak Russian, and they studied Marx and Lenin, and they knew communism inside out, and they were going to school to fight the commies. And you almost kind of feel sorry for them, because if you look at their age, right? Elliot Abrams, Mike Pompeo, John, what is his name? Bolton, John Bolton, right, with his mustache. And you almost like feel sorry for them a little bit, because it's like they'd studied all this history of Sovietology, and then the Cold War ended. And so what were they going to do? What are they going to do? I mean, you look at John Bolton, he's like an expert on every country we want to overthrow. You look at Elliot Abrams, he lied to Congress. He was actually convicted and then pardoned for deception and the role in the Iran-Contra. Mike Pompeo, who's just a psychopath. I mean, it's just, this guy wants World War III. I mean, it's like enough people haven't died from coronavirus. Let's make sure that more Iranians die. Let's make sure that more Venezuelans die from coronavirus. Let's make sure we escalate with China. We can't team up with them to fight coronavirus. Oh no, can't do that. I mean, it's like, you look at these people and they're all elderly white men who studied like Sovietology in the 80s, and they're really like, I don't know. They all kind of have this kind of like, they remind you of Dwight Schrute. You ever watch The Office? They remind you of Dwight from The Office. That old, that it's not on the air anymore, but the Office show in the United States. The Dwight guy, who's kind of a nerd, who's always talking about weapons, and he's always like kind of authoritarian and manly, and he's like, he doesn't kind of get people socially. He doesn't quite click, it's like they all kind of remind you of Dwight from The Office. They're kind of like stuffed shirt guys with wire-rimmed glasses, and Soviet Union. We got to fight against the Soviet Union and the communists, and yes. And it's like these people that like probably read Tom Clancy novels like nonstop. I think, right? These are guys who probably just read nothing but Tom Clancy all day long. And they're sitting there, oh, yes, Nicolas Maduro, and we're going to send him to Guantanamo Bay. Yes, he's a narco-terrorist. That's right, yes. He's conspiring with the Colombians to flood the United States with cocaine, like we did in the 1980s. Yes, sir. Yes. It's just, it's awkward. It's awkward. And you get the impression that Trump has like a strange relationship with this particular faction. And that, I talked about Gina Haspel. I talked about the Bush family, and it's like this particularly like stuffed shirt, CIA faction of CIA neocons that don't quite buy into that agency's whole outlook with the Eastern establishment and the Rockefellers and soft power. They're more these kind of like hard-nosed CIA guys, right? Nicolas Maduro, come on. I'm sorry. And it's like, how many military bases does the USA have in Colombia? At one point, Venezuela has been harshly critical of the FARC, folks. Venezuela is not a supporter of the FARC, right, by any means. They were supporters of the peace deal. But at one point, there were some very harsh denunciations of Venezuela by the FARC. Of course, Venezuela supported the peace deal in Colombia, but Venezuela, they're not aligned with the FARC. That's just ridiculous. The Colombian border with Venezuela, that's where all this anti-Venezuelan, subversive elements were going over. And that border, give me a break. Give me a break. Conspired to flood the United States with cocaine. And so they're using like 1980s, drug scare kind of stuff. And they're throwing into the hopper like terrorism, right? They're throwing in like 9/11. So it's narco terrorism. And Venezuela is coming to get us. So this is a moment where we should be cooperating with Venezuela to stop coronavirus. Same with Iran. We should be cooperating with Iran to stop coronavirus. We should be cooperating with China to stop coronavirus, right? Look at the footage of Russian planes landing in Italy. Look at the footage of Cuban doctors arriving in Italy. Look at the footage of Chinese medicine and supplies and masks arriving in Italy. And then think about the sanctions the USA is imposing on the world right now. This attitude, this response to the crisis that we have in the United States right now is unbelievable. We need, more than anything, international cooperation. We need a global effort. The fact that Mike Pompeo, we had this G20 emergency summit, and he wrecked it. It wouldn't even have a declaration because he insisted it's going to be called the Wuhan virus. We're calling it the Wuhan virus. It's the Wuhan virus. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's really ridiculous what the United States is doing right now. It's particularly awful. And I guess that's what must be said. And an escalation with Venezuela. Venezuela needs medical supplies, right? Italy needs medical supply. We should be helping the world. This is a moment where global cooperation is needed more than ever. This is not the moment to be pushing regime change wars. This is not the moment to be pushing instability around the world. What these people are doing, if you're not angry at Mike Pompeo, you should be. You really, really should be. What else is new, folks? What else is new? And thank you, Shaniqua, for this super chat. I'm glad I could address that. I saw that and I thought, what in the world are they doing? That's what I thought. Drugs are an awful thing. And the socialist countries, trust me, the Venezuelan government would like to get rid of drug dealers, and they have worked very hard. They took me when I was in Venezuela. I'll never forget this. In Venezuela, in central Caracas, I went to a neighborhood, and I've actually got video of it on my YouTube channel. I went to a neighborhood in central Caracas where they have this beautiful community auditorium. It's an auditorium, and they have the high school graduations there. The kids in the community put on plays and community theater there. They have concerts there. It's just a nice auditorium that they built in this low-income neighborhood in Caracas. And do you know what the lot where this beautiful, just beautiful, I wish I could take you there and show you this beautiful theater, this beautiful auditorium. Do you know what they used to do in that auditorium? It used to, that spot, that lot, that empty vacant area where that auditorium used to be, prior to the socialist government building this beautiful community assembly, it had been the place where heroin dealers would sell their drugs. It was like the needle spot. It was where everyone would go to do drugs, number one. And number two, it was where stolen cars would be broken up. People would take stolen cars there and break them apart and distribute the parts. It was a car thief and heroin dealing, spot. And the socialist government said, okay, let's stop that. And they built this beautiful, beautiful community auditorium there. It was beautiful, right? The socialist government in Venezuela has done so much to get people out of crime, to get people out of drugs, to get people, they've given people an alternative. If you want to know, you want to look at a narco state, look at Colombia, the Colombian government, Uribe, right? U.S. officials have admitted that the U.S.-aligned right-wing government of Colombia is heavily involved in the drug trade. The paramilitaries, the Colombian paramilitary groups that are anti-communist, I mean, look at the U.S. aligned regimes of Mexico over the years. I mean, go down the line, right? The Contras of Nicaragua, that were sent there to overthrow the Sandinistas. I mean, the U.S. aligned regimes are up to their necks in cocaine and drugs and, I mean, talk about, Afghanistan and how the people that the U.S. was aligned with there to fight the Soviet Union were, doing heroin and funding heroin and working with the Pakistani secret police to smuggle heroin. I mean, it's like the drug trade. I mean, you want to talk about drugs. I mean, in China, freeing the country from opium addiction, freeing the country from opioids was one of the greatest accomplishments of the revolution, right? And, I mean, in Cuba, they've been huge anti-drug efforts, right? I mean, it's just, I mean, drugs are something that the socialist movement has successfully fought against, right? Whereas the imperialists are happy to work with drug runners and drug suppliers to bring down socialist governments. So this allegation against Venezuela, unbelievable stuff. Um, there you go. Yeah. What else is on people's minds, folks? I'm having a good time. Might need some more water, but I'm having a good time here, folks. People ask me what I'm reading. I'm working on like a little like mini pamphlet or booklet, and I'm doing a lot of research on CIA funding of pseudo leftism during the what you call the Cultural Cold War, right? The Congress for Cultural Freedom. I've got some documents about that. I'm going to publish a document. I'm going to publish like a little pamphlet or something about the synthetic left. I made a video that was on this channel called The Synthetic Left, and it was very popular. And I think that's one of my concepts. I talk about it in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, but I'm actually going to turn it into a little booklet, not a full book, but a little booklet that will just kind of explain it. And kind of lay out the proof in a little more in-depth way than I do in City Builders and Vandals, and just kind of focus on that topic. And I'm trying to make use of my free time as I'm housebound in New York City amid this pandemic. I'm trying to make use of my time by talking, by working on that. And I don't know how exactly I'll do it. I don't know if I'll publish it like as a book that people can order, or I just have the PDF on the internet, or I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it, but I'm working on it. The first 2 chapters are done. There's going to be about 4 more chapters. It's not going to be a huge work, but it's just going to be a lot of documentation and kind of spelling out my arguments about the synthetic left and what the synthetic left really is. So stay tuned. And I'm also working on book 2, but book 2 is a big, long work. I mean, a lot of things. Yeah. But there you go. Yeah. But what else is on people's minds, folks? Super chats are appreciated. Be sure to tweet this out, make this a bigger conversation. Yeah. Is Vietnam easing relations with China? Well, it should be. And I know that there's a lot of cooperation between Vietnam and China against coronavirus, and that Vietnam has done a pretty phenomenal job with COVID-19, and that they have been really on top of this. Latest on Bolivia. Yeah, I mean, right-wing coup government. They're not letting Evo Morales participate in the elections. Evo Morales is in exile. Unbelievable. Imagine thinking Soros was on the left. Yeah, I mean, George Soros is one of the best friends of Western capitalism and imperialism, destabilizing socialist governments. This is one of these things these people on the right don't get. It's like, yes, he's a liberal, right? He's not a stodgy conservative, right? He's all about, sex, drugs, and rock and roll and, color revolutions, but an anti-communist like you wouldn't believe. George Soros is the synthetic left. These people don't get that, right? That there is a left face of imperialism and capitalism, and it's a more effective, right? I think Obama, people used to talk about, was Obama the lesser of two evils? He was the more effective evil. No, Republican president could have done what Obama did in Libya, right? Bomb an African country, destroy an African country, kill a Pan-Africanist leader. It took Obama to do that, right? Obama, imagine if George W. Bush had been president during the Arab Spring, right? Imagine what would have happened, right? The fact that the Arab Spring, this mass uprising all over the Muslim world, the Arab world, it was turned into basically destabilization of Syria, destabilization of Libya. It played into the hand of the Muslim Brotherhood. It played into the hand of U.S.-supported forces and destabilized anti-imperialist governments. That was to the benefit of Western capitalism. You couldn't have done that without Obama. right? And that Obama was very much a strategic part of maintaining Western capitalism's dominance. And what's interesting is that under Obama, you had two main aligned forces with the United States in the Middle East. You had the Saudi Wahhabis, right? That's Saudi Arabia. They're Wahhabi Muslims. They believe in an autocratic monarchy. They're Wahhabis. And then you had the Muslim Brotherhood, right? And they were both aligned with the United States. And what seems to have happened is that since the rise of Trump, the Wahhabis are solidly with Trump. The Saudis love Trump. You saw, Trump in Saudi Arabia. But it seems like the Muslim Brotherhood, has been alienated, right? And that seems to be a big divide. Trump even talked about naming the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, putting them on the foreign terrorist group. And the Muslim Brotherhood is anti-Iran and anti-Syria, but they seem to favor negotiations with Iran. They don't want war against Iran, whereas the Wahhabis and the Saudis do want war against Iran. So there seems to be division. Now, I was asked about Marxists preparing for the next recession. Folks, we need to start thinking, and I said this on a previous live. The main thing that needs to be done now is we need to, build community. That needs to be done. And we need to start building community, caring for people. When people are suffering, people are already suffering. And as society comes back on, as we start being allowed to have public gatherings again and stuff, we need to start feeding people and taking care of people and giving services to people who are left behind. And at the same time, giving ideology, giving ideological training. That needs to be done. It absolutely needs to be done. And that's how you do it. That's what socialist groups do around the world, right? Left adventurism, violence, that's not the answer, right? Just voting for the Democrats. Elections are important, right? People can vote, and I'm not opposed to participating in elections. But the main thing that socialists have done is build community, right? You talk about the unemployment councils that the Communist Party built during the 1930s. You talk about, general history of the Muslim Brotherhood and its role in anti-communism. Was it created by Churchill? The Muslim Brotherhood was not created by Churchill, but it started in the 1920s in Egypt, and it was a reaction to modernity. It was just a conservative reaction, as Egypt was, it was a British colony, and it had a history of being colonized by the British, and in the 1920s you had just this conservative religious movement. It started getting CIA support in the 1950s, right? In the 1950s you had Abdel Nasser, who was the socialist president of Egypt. And Abdel Nasser, is very anti-Zionist, very anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, aligned with the Soviet Union. He electrified all of Egypt. He built the Aswan Dam, which is the biggest hydroelectrical power plant in the Middle East. He brought electricity to all of Egypt. He provided education in Egypt. He was a socialist. He was a Marxist, right? An Arab socialist, Marxist. Did a lot of tremendous things for Egypt. And against him, there was this uprising. There was this, underground Muslim Brotherhood that was formed. It was already in existence, but the CIA started supporting them as terrorists against Abdel Nasser. And the Muslim Brotherhood, from what I understand, during the Second World War, was very sympathetic to Hitler. And the basic belief of the Muslim Brotherhood is they're small business owners, and they believe capitalism is great as long as everyone's a true Muslim, and that communism and Arab nationalism are the greatest evil. They oppose Arab nationalism because everyone should just be a Muslim, and there should be no Arab national identity, and they oppose socialism and Marxism because it's atheist and not religious, and they do charity work, and they feed poor people, and they use poor people as their foot soldiers, basically, and it's small business owners. And they tend to be very, hostile to the military. And the military in the Arab world tends to be where the socialist and nationalist governments come from. So they tend to be very hostile to the military. And on that basis, that's kind of the divide in the ruling class. If you go to the Arab countries, you have a section of the ruling class that is more nationalist, that is tied to the military, that tends to be pro-Soviet or socialistic and anti-imperialist. And then you have a section that's pro-imperialist, it's small business owners, and is deeply religious. And that's the divide that you have in the Arab countries, right? And the Ba'ath movement was around the sections of the bourgeoisie that were more pro-military and more anti-imperialist, and they used, entered an alliance with the workers to fight imperialism. And, the Muslim Brotherhood tends to be small business owners who do a lot of charity work and feed people and hate communism and hate Marxism and believe that, you know, capitalism is fine as long as everyone is super religious, and Marxism and nationalism are evil. That's the divide, right? That's the big divide. Now, in Saudi Arabia, you don't have that divide. Saudi Arabia is a totalitarian autocracy where you have Wahhabism as the state religion. You can be executed for insulting the king, etc. But within the countries, you know, where you had Arab nationalism and all that, that's kind of the divide. The Muslim Brotherhood, you know, that's you know, that's one current. And actually, interesting, Erdogan very much is out of that Muslim Brotherhood current. Now, Gulen, who was the Turkish, whatever you want to call it, he was the you know, he was kind of the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood current in Egypt. Gulen, you know, is now in exile in the United States. He had a falling out with Erdogan. But Erdogan very much came out of that current of small business owners, anti-communists who believe in, capitalism with lots of charity and lots of religion. And actually, it was interesting because I did a story a couple years back, in 2016, after the attempted coup in Turkey. I actually was sent to go, and I didn't do an interview with him, but I went to the compound where Gulen lives, actually, and did a story from that compound where Gulen lives in Pennsylvania. And what was interesting was I was not able to talk to Gulen. I have a photo with Gulen, and like Gulen, basically, he called this press conference. He wanted to announce to the world he was still alive. That was why he happened, and I was there. Chinese TV there was there. And we went, and we just there he was, Gulen, and they took pictures, and my camera crew was there, and we weren't allowed to ask him any questions or anything. What I thought was interesting though was that the guides, the people who were managing the press, right? The representatives of the Gulen movement, were telling us how they joined the Gulen movement. And I remember the one Turkish fellow was saying the reason he started following Gulen was because he was a Muslim. And he was a Muslim growing up in Turkey. He was religious, but he wanted to work with computers, and that this caused him a huge amount of angst because he believed that a true Muslim could not work with computers because computers were Western decadent and they were not acceptable. But then he found this magazine in the 80s by Gulen, where Gulen said that one could be a true, loyal Muslim and also work with computers. And it opened his mind, and that's how he became a follower of Gulen, right? And that, Gulen, that's CIA, it's pro-imperialist, in Turkey, anti-communist, anti-Syria, anti-Iran. It's the Brotherhood. It's a Brotherhood current. And Erdogan, they talk about Gulen being like the Trotsky of the Islamic Revolution in Turkey. Some people have made that analogy because Gulen was basically, he was the cleric, who was the leader of the current that eventually brought Erdogan to power. And Erdogan took power kind of based on this mass movement of Gulen supporters. But then Gulen and Erdogan had kind of a falling out with each other. And now Gulen is in exile. And most of the people, the officers who were heavily involved in the coup attempt against Erdogan in 2016 were followers of Gulen. And Gulen is absolutely illegal in Turkey. He's a subversive and all of that. And and the security they had at this compound was crazy. You wouldn't believe it. Yeah, but that's another story. But anyway, and that's kind of the situation. But someone sent me another super chat, and I can't remember what it was about. I was talking about Turkey and Gulen and stuff. There was another super chat that came through. What was it about? Someone remind me. I don't want to skip over it. I want to give whoever sent that super chat their answer. So please, I'm reading the chat here, and let's repost their super chat so I can make sure to answer their question. Putin, that's right. Okay, thank you. Yes, Putin, would like to change the constitution so he can run again, right? A lot of countries don't have term limits, right? In the UK, I don't think they have term limits. Japan doesn't have term limits. They do have term limits at this point in Russia, and they're going to have a vote, I believe, to change the constitution so Putin can run once again. Obviously that vote is not going to happen anytime soon because Russia is very much locked down because of the coronavirus. Here in the USA, we're continuing our elections because of the coronavirus. The people were told to go vote and all of that, participate in the elections. Well, they shouldn't be voting. You can't have an election amid a pandemic. You can't do it. You cannot have an election amid a pandemic. Doesn't matter. I'm sorry. If any other country, right, in the United States, we're having primary votes during the pandemic. Unbelievable, right? And Ohio canceled its vote. Louisiana canceled their vote. And the DNC threatened to take their delegates away, right? Threatened to take their delegates away. This is unbelievable, right? Pandemics, you can't have people going to the polls. You can't. Older folks who shouldn't be outside at all, right? How can you do this? If Iran had an election right now, the U.S. government would say, this is a fraudulent election. See, they staged an election during a pandemic so they could win, right? I mean, if Venezuela had an election right now, but the United States keeps going on ahead with its primary vote, we're a democracy. We're the United States. We can do whatever we want. And that brings me to something I do want to talk about, which is Joe Biden. Joe Biden. Folks, I mean, can you believe it? Can you believe it, folks? I mean, this is the Democrats' candidate. They're telling us Bernie Sanders, oh no, can't do it, right? And it looks like the Democratic nominee is going to be Joe Biden, who cannot get through a TV interview. I mean, watch the videos, right? He didn't speak for like 4 days, right? There was this big gap where he said nothing. But his recent interviews on MSNBC, he can't finish his sentence. I mean, this man, I mean, you almost feel sorry for him in a way. I mean, he's got dementia. I mean, it's like he can't finish his sentence. He freezes. He just freezes there. You know, and it's just dead silent, like he's having a seizure or something. I mean, this is who the Democrats think is going to take on Donald Trump. Is going to beat Donald Trump at the polls? Are you kidding me? But Donald Trump, you know, he gets up and says wildly inaccurate things, right? We know that. He's done that during this pandemic. He's gotten up and said wildly inaccurate things and given the wrong information, which is not a good thing to be doing at this time. But Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden can't even finish what he's saying. He can't even finish his thoughts. They ask him a question. Oh, that's just like... And he just stops. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? I mean, you know, or it's that, or he's talking about, you know, black families got to keep the record player on. They got to keep the record player on. No one has a record player. I mean, hipsters maybe in Brooklyn have record player. What is he talking about? They got to keep the record player on. You know, or I got fought with corn pop and my leg hair. I mean, this is who the Democratic Party has decided is their candidate to run against Donald Trump in the 2020 vote. I mean, this, and now there's the sexual allegations. I haven't looked specifically into the details, but there's some sexual assault allegations that are getting a lot of play in the media. This is who the Democrats want to run against Trump with. I mean, this is unbelievable, folks. This is unbelievable. I mean, this is the situation we're in. Trump or Biden? Trump or Biden? You want Trump or Biden? Right? Now, some people have the theory that maybe they'll finally say Biden's unfit and somehow Hillary Clinton will get the nomination. Right? He's already said it will be a woman who is his vice nominee. Will it be Hillary Clinton and they'll keep him on the ticket? Will it be Michelle Obama? What in the world are they doing here? What in the world are they doing here? I mean, there you go. I mean, this is, the whole country's shut down with coronavirus. Joe Biden has been anointed as the candidate, even though he cannot finish a sentence. We shouldn't be afraid of Joe Biden. We should be afraid of his handlers, right? We should be figuring out who are his handlers, right? You know, the real threat was not Barack Obama during the Obama years. It was Samantha Power. It was Anne Marie Slaughter. It was Hillary Clinton, who was running the State Department. John Kerry, I think, probably played a more positive role in the Obama administration, I think, with his push for the negotiations with Iran and such. Maybe not. I don't know. Do you think the DNC want Trump to win? I don't know. I feel like, you get the impression, right? How could a party nominate Joe Biden to be their candidate, right? Why couldn't they find someone slicker? Why couldn't they find someone more articulate, somebody who's a little younger? It's like, why did they nominate Hillary Clinton in 2016? It's not that they want to lose. It's that their corruption gets in their way, all right? When machines become bureaucratic and corrupt, it's like they can't work in their own interest anymore. You know what I'm saying? And I saw this. I actually saw this in some of the organizations I used to work with. It's like everyone in the group kind of knows what they should do if they want to function, but certain people have to get their due, right? Certain people have become powerful, and if you don't keep them happy, they get mad. And, everyone has their little kingdom and their little fiefdom, and everything's a backroom negotiation, and there's never any frank discussion about what's best for the group. I've seen this on a small scale. And people see this in companies that go out of business, right? Companies where it's like, it's like one little company, it's like one CEO, right? And he built it, right? And he never became a Fortune 500 company. It became his little business, and it was slick. It was exciting in the early days, but then after a while, everyone who's been there for so long, well, this person's owed this and this person's owed that, and pretty soon, everyone in the company, everyone in the organization, everyone in the bureaucracy knows what needs to be done. They know what needs to be done, but they can't do it because the machine is being pulled in so many different directions. So many people are owed this and owed that. We all knew 2016 Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee because it was her turn, as they said, right? The Democratic Party is set up like that. This is the party of urban political machines, the party of Tammany Hall, the party of Rizzo in Philadelphia, the party of the Chicago political machine, Rahm Emanuel, and all of that. And this is, it's very bureaucratic in the way it's set up. And it's like they can't not nominate Joe Biden. Like I mean, they don't want to nominate Joe Biden. I think that there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party who don't like Bernie, or Democratic Party, DNC, mainstream folks who go, oh, shoot. But they just can't. They know how the game is played. They know how the grease is wheeled, right? I'm trying to use expressions here. But they know how things are set up, and they just can't not nominate Joe Biden. It's set up a certain way, and there's no way around it. They can't not nominate Joe Biden. They just have to nominate Joe Biden. That's just what they're going to do. They are going to nominate Joe Biden. Joe Biden is incoherent. Joe Biden, his chances of winning are slim. His chances, you never know if he's going to finish his sentence or if he's going to say something racially inappropriate or what. But that's just, the Democratic Party can't help itself, right? It's just so bureaucratic. It's so much a pecking order, right? It's got a caste system. It's got a wait your turn. It's, and it's, the way it was, the way it's set up, it's just so, it can't help itself. It's a party of old, bureaucratic, powerful people from urban political machines. And they're just, this is what they do. It's how it works. It's funny. There's a woman in New York City who I follow on social media. I've met her a number of times over the years. Her name, and please, this is not an endorsement. She doesn't agree with me on a lot of things. I don't agree with her on a huge number of things. But she's running for like a local position in the Democratic Party. Her name's Mumita Ahmed, and she's a Bernie Sanders supporter. And I've been following her social media posts, and she's not running for any elected office. She's just running for like local position in the Democratic Party of New York City. And read about what she's described. There were rumors started on social media that she has AIDS. There were all kinds of hate mail sent to her. You should believe it. She's just running for like local Democratic Party club leader or something like that. And it's like she has been hit with like everything but the kitchen sink because that belongs to somebody. You know what I'm saying? That's some old stuffed shirt bureaucrat's position, and she's trying to shake it up. And you read about her. I don't know her that well, but just read her posts about, she also talked about at the New York State Democratic Convention in 2016, how she was hit with a cane. Right? Some old man was angry that she was supporting Bernie at the DNC, at the New York State Democratic Convention, and he whacked her with a cane. He like assaulted her, this old guy. You should read about the kind of things that go on inside like local Democratic Party stuff. It's really ugly, right? That local politics is very, very ugly. It's bizarre. And the Democratic Party, I've always said this. I've said this many times. The Republican Party, their weakness is that they're fanatics, right? They're religious fanatics, they're neocon war hawks, they're right-wing, and a lot of times there's a lot of Americans who might vote for them, but they just are put off by that fanaticism. right? The fanaticism is just too much. They just can't handle it. The weakness of the Democratic Party is that no one believes them when they talk. They are liars. They make promises that they don't keep. Everyone knows that they are a party of urban political machines and corruption and broken promises and disappointments. And it's hard to get people excited about a Democrat. Obama was an exception. Obama came out of nowhere and was young, and he was able to fire people up and get them passionate. And that's almost the only way you can get people excited about the Democrats, is to have like somebody come out of nowhere like that. I mean, we know Obama didn't come out of nowhere. We know about his family history and all of that, but no one had ever heard of him, right? 2004 was the first time anyone had ever heard of him, really. And he just suddenly, he was this big name, and he was passionate, and he wasn't associated with that. But you can't get excited about Joe Biden. You can't getting excited about Joe Biden. It's like getting excited about, I don't know. It's about like getting excited about Ed Koch, right? Getting excited about Joe Biden is like getting excited about the guy who has been the representative of your district for 50 years and nothing has ever gotten better, and everyone knows he's corrupt and everyone knows he doesn't care, but he's in the job. I mean, it's getting excited about Joe Biden. It's about, like, you can't get excited about Hillary Clinton, right? I mean, there are some people, right? There's a certain layer of people who could get excited about Hillary Clinton, right? I'm with her and she's a woman, but it was not very big. Those rallies were really small. And again, she's been doing this how long? She was, with Bill Clinton, the Clinton years, and then she was in the Senate, and then she was Secretary of State. And it's like, you can't get excited about Hillary Clinton. She is the problems that you're mad about. You want hope and change. She's what you need to hope and change against. You should hope to get rid of and want to change, right? I mean, you can't get excited about Joe Biden. Joe Biden gets up there and talks about all the, the drug laws and all that. He wrote those drug laws. Right? I mean, it's like Joe Biden is everything that if you are a progressive and you want reform and you want to get excited, he is everything you want to reform, right? I mean, you can't get excited about Joe Biden. You can't, right? You just can't do it, and Republicans, they have, because they exude that kind of radicalism. Sometimes they're able to get an energy behind them that's really bizarre. Doesn't make any sense, but they're able to kind of, Reagan was able to do that. Reagan was awful, but he was able to kind of present himself as kind of an anti-establishment figure. He was, for tax revolts and the small businessman who's been left behind. Get the government off our backs. Ronald Reagan, because, and he was kind of a right-wing fanatic, right? And he was able to kind of exude this kind of fanatical spirit. If you want to really get a movement behind you that can get you into the White House, you need to kind of get people to feel fanatical, right? Reagan was able to do that. Bill Clinton was able to do that to some degree, right? Bill Clinton's very charismatic, but Bill Clinton's main thing is he kind of played the role that New Labour played in Britain, right? Bill Clinton, his main thing was to go after the left wing of the Democratic Party, to purge the left wing of the Democratic Party. That was his thing with the DLC. And Bill Clinton, it was like the Democratic Party is too far left. I'm going to bring it to the center. I'm a Southern governor. I'm a racist. Here's a video of me with the chain gang. I believe on tough on crime. All the, Bill Clinton, welfare reform and all of that. Bill Clinton was basically, announcing to the world that you didn't have to be you didn't have to have a left-wing bone in your body to be a Democrat. And it worked, right? And, he's very charismatic and, a likable guy on a personal level. He knew how to just kind of get people to like you. And, he had kind of a charisma, but he was the first Democratic president. He was an advocate of neoliberalism. And here's what I wanted to get to, folks. It was funny. I had this illusion I was going to start this live with this. Well, it's been a wild night. But neoliberalism, it's a word that it's used all the time, and people don't know what it means. Go to Wikipedia right now and type in the words neoliberalism. Right? Neoliberal does not mean moderate Democrat. That is not what the word neoliberalism means. It does not mean moderate Democrat. It does not mean moderate Democrat. It does not mean moderate Democrat. Neoliberalism is an economic philosophy, right? It refers to economic liberalism, not liberals and conservatives, right? Not political liberalism versus political conservatism, but economic liberalism, free markets, right? And there's classical economic liberalism. And then there was an attempt with Milton Friedman, with other folks, to carry out what they called neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, right? Which was, it's always better if the government doesn't do it. School choice, private prisons, military contractors. It's always better if it's a private company that does it. Let's move toward unregulated capitalism. Let's privatize things. It's Milton Friedman. It's, the Montpellier Society, Hayek. That's what neoliberalism is. It's an economic term. Go to Wikipedia. And people don't know that. And a lot of people just hear this word, neoliberalism, and they assume it means, liberals that are not far left, that are like moderates. That's not what it means. In fact, Republicans are far more neoliberal than Democrats. Democrats started being advocates of neoliberalism under Bill Clinton. Republicans have been advocates of neoliberalism since, the 50s, 60s, right? I mean, neoliberalism is not related to liberals in the political sense. It's an economic term. The father of neoliberalism is Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was the advisor to Richard Nixon's presidential campaign. He was in the Nixon White House. Nixon kicked him out, very famously, said, we're all Keynesians now, kicked him out of the White House. He was back, Milton Friedman was back advising U.S. presidents after Nixon was removed. Neoliberalism is an economic school of thought that says the market is always better. That's what neoliberalism is. But people all over the internet use the term incorrectly. And the reason that they use the term incorrectly is because no one ever bothered to explain what it meant. I remember when I was first getting involved in leftist stuff, and I would hear people using words, and I did not know what these words meant, but I was 15. And I did not want to look like I didn't know what they meant, and so I would start using the words as well, and I would not know what they meant either. And that this has gone on in leftist circles for way too long, is when people start using words and they don't know what they mean. Like when I first started listening to communists and listening to Marxists talk, they'd always be like, the contradiction of this. Well, I've been watching the presidential election, and there are clear contradictions. And it's like, what does contradiction mean? Well, we know what it means in everyday life, right? If I say, hey, my tie is blue, and someone says, no, your tie is green, they're contradicting you. That's what everyday people understand contradiction to mean, right? It's like the Monty Python sketch where the guy's arguing with him, and he says, this isn't an argument, this is contradiction. You're just giving me contradiction. It's not an argument. That's what it means in everyday life, right? In Marxism, contradiction refers to a very important philosophical concept that comes from Hegel. And there are two ideas that cannot coexist with each other, right? The Hegelian dialectic, the contradiction, the clash, right? One must divide into two, like Mao said, right? You have a thesis, an antithesis, and they clash to form a synthesis, right? This is Hegel, dialectics, right? History advances through struggle and through contradiction, right? That's the contradiction is the driving force of history, right? The clash, the inevitable clash and contradiction that drives history forward. That's an essential point of Marxism. No one ever explained that to me, but I have a feeling the people using those words didn't know what it meant either. And I've noticed this in leftist circles. People want to sound smart, and so they just start walking around the contradiction. Well, that's not what it means. Imperialism is a word that gets thrown around in leftist circles all the time. I hear people talk about imperialism. People do not know what that word is. People think it's a synonym for colonialism, right? That's the most common thing. Well, when the USA invades a country, that's imperialism. I've even heard people, big pet peeve of mine, people start saying imperializing. The U.S. imperialized Iraq. It imperialized Iraq? No, it didn't imperialize Iraq. What the hell are you talking about? It's a pet peeve of mine. They're imperializing people. No, they're not imperializing people. That's not correct. Imperialism is not a synonym for colonialism. It is not a word. It's not a verb. Imperialism is not a verb. It's not something you do. Imperialism is a noun. Imperialism is a system. It is a system. Lenin wrote a book called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and he described an economic system where banks, based in Western countries, dominant over industries, and they form huge multinational cartels and monopolies that divide up the world into spheres of influence. That is what imperialism is. Right? Imperialism is a system. Imperialism is not a policy. It's not a verb. It's a system. Right? Again, there is so little basic information. People criticize me on social media because I say don't just open Marx. Read a textbook. Read Fundamentals of Marxism, Leninism. Read History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster. Read introductory Marxist material. And people say, "Oh, Caleb, how dare you?" No, but I'm telling you, you have to know what you're talking about, right? And that we need more basic text. Whenever I write, whenever I speak, I try to assume that my audience knows nothing. That's not an insult to my audience. I mean, occasionally I'll get people say, "Oh, why is everything you do on such a basic level?" Well, there's a reason for that, which is that we're in the United States. In 2020, for goodness sakes, nobody knows anything about socialism. Nobody knows anything about Marxism. Nobody knows anything about socialism. Nobody knows anything about Marxism. So if you're trying to get people to understand these ideas, you have to start on a basic level. Why do we find a way to destigmatize technology for older people? They watch TV, they use the internet. Well, there are old people. I know a number of older people that are very good on the internet. I know people that are over 70, over 80 who are on the internet. There's probably people over 70 or over 80 watching this right now. It's about will. Some older folks want to learn it and some don't, right? I mean, now, for those of us who grew up with technology, it's going to be a lot easier, right? We just grew up with it. Our brains were developing at a time when the technology existed, so it's a lot easier. But there are a lot of older folks who can do it. I know older folks, people in their 60s, 70s, who are on the internet and on Facebook and Twitter, and they can figure it out and they can do it. It's harder for them, right? We need to be patient. It's harder for them, but they can do it, right? But some just don't want it, right? And they don't need it, right? They've got a system. They know how their life works. They read the newspaper, right? They don't want it, right? And maybe they don't need it. I mean, right? I mean, maybe they're happier that way. It's about will. And like I said, it's much harder for them. And you got to be patient, right? People make jokes about boomer tech and all of that. I try to be patient with folks, right? I mean, the internet came along when I was in elementary school, and we thought it was like the coolest, most exciting thing. I meet people now who were born after 9/11, or 9/11 happened when they were 3, and internet their whole lives. And yeah, it's a different way of being, right? I mean, I think about, my grandparents and how important it was to talk to them because, they could remember a time before television. And think of how differently the human mind worked before television, right? Human beings' minds worked differently before the invention of television, folks. They did. Television drastically changed the way human beings think, right? The human psyche was reinvented by television, right? Sure, we thought in the same way and all that, but the way we see ourselves, the way we see the world, a lot of things changed. And the internet and social media has really changed the way a lot of people see themselves, the way a lot of people see the world. Let's be real about it, right? A lot of things have changed. I haven't been back to my hometown in a long time. I don't know how much it would be like the hometown I grew up in the 90s, right? With the internet now, with all kinds of different ideas. I meet people I went to school with who are like into 9/11 truth. No one was into 9/11 truth when I was a kid. You know what I mean? But, things change. Right? I mean, the way people see things, the way people understand the world, things change. Things change. And the internet, social media, all of that has drastically changed the way people think. And if you grew up in a time where that didn't exist, your mind is going to be, it's going to take some adjusting. Let me put it that way. And it's going to be much harder to adjust. It's going to be much harder to adjust for folks that are older. But they can, if they really want to do it, and their mind is still with them, they don't have like Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that. If their mind is still with them and they want to do it, they can white knuckle it and do it. And some will and some won't. And I don't want to force, if people don't want to do it, you can't make them. You can't make them. I mean, if people don't want to do it, why make them? Why ruin it? If they've got a system in their life where they're living their life, they're paying their bills, they're happy, they feel entertained, they have what they want, and they feel like they don't need the internet, good for them. That's their business. There's no reason to make them, right? But at the same time, some of these older folks might be happier with access to the internet. Maybe they're lonely, right? Maybe they don't have any family and all that. But if they had access to the internet, they can be reading, they can be watching great YouTube lives like this. I mean, maybe they'd be happier with it. So it's an individual choice, but we have to be patient. We have to realize it's harder for them. So I hope that answers your question. Very good question. Very good super chat. But yeah, folks, it's an interesting conversation that we're having here. Another thing, right? You want to talk about people using terms and not understanding them. I made a post about this because I heard this person say this and it just stuck in my mind. It was one of those things where there's a part of your mind that goes, that's not right. And I mean, you hear someone say something, it's like, that's not true, that's not right. And it just irks you. And especially when it's somebody, it's somebody who you can't disagree with. Like, they're going to say something wildly inaccurate, and then you're going to be like, that's not true, and they're going to, like, quibble with you. Somebody I knew, right, they were talking about somebody they thought was evil, and someone they just thought was evil, and they said, I looked at them, and they're just so much more evil than everybody else, and I just thought about Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil, and my head wanted to explode. Do you know what banality means? It means ordinary. Ordinariness. Right? Hannah Arendt, right? This liberal, intellectual, CIA anti-totalitarian, intellectual in New York City. She wrote a book about Adolf Eichmann, who was this Nazi, who had, participated in the Holocaust and killed a lot of people. And she wrote this essay, or this book, right, about him, and described the banality of evil. Basically saying he seemed like a normal guy, and her whole essay was about how Nazism and fascism is about conformity and a lack of free thinking, and, I was just following orders, etc. That's her point. But I heard somebody who does not understand that. They just know it's this smart thing people say about the banality of evil. Yeah, I thought of him and I thought about the banality of evil. Hannah Arendt. Banality means ordinariness. It means, no, I mean, and I heard this and my head wanted to explode, right? But again, it's just something every liberal ever, every academic, they all sit there and they reference Hannah Arendt and the banality of evil. The boringness, the ordinariness of evil. That's what that means, right? But nobody, people don't understand the actual concept that she's making. And so they cite it and they just think it sounds smart and they don't know what it actually means. And it's like neoliberalism. People think neoliberal means moderate Democrat. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It means free market economic policies. People think contradiction means you're contradicting me. During Occupy Wall Street, I remember people would be like, if you argued with someone too loudly, they'd be like, stop being so reactionary. Oh my God. No. Reactive. You mean stop reacting to the other person, but reactionary. The term reactionary, right? They talk about in politics. You have conservatives that want to keep things as they are. You have liberals that want reform. You have radicals that want to uproot everything and change things. And you have reactionaries. There are people that want to move backward, right? So if you argue with someone loudly, you are not being reactionary. You are reacting to them. You're being reactive. But the political term reactionary, if someone is being reactionary or acting reactionary, it means that they want to restore the past. It means that they're a far-right conservative. They want to roll back present-day reforms, right? They're not a conservative who just wants to preserve things. They are ultra-right-wing. They are reactionary. But people would always be like, oh, stop being so reactionary, man. You'd be arguing with somebody and someone would be like, man, communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. And I'd be like, no, it didn't actually. It's actually been successful. Stop being so reactionary. It's like, I'm not being reactionary. It's again, somebody heard somebody using the word reactionary. There have been rumors about Dugin and Putin. And I mean, like I said, I don't think Dugin is as popular in Russia as I think that he's kind of a boogeyman that Western media likes to scare people with. And he's just scary to Western society, and he's kind of an easy, scary thing. I don't think he has the level of influence in Russia. And I don't know why you keep asking me this. This is just silliness, but whatever. But yeah, like reactionary, right? The term reactionary, right? I mean, again, somebody heard someone using the term, didn't know what it meant, but wanted to start using the word themselves, and it's obnoxious. And again, people need introductory material to understand what imperialism is, to understand what fascism is, to understand what capitalism, and it's really, really annoying. And we need to get past this kind of situation where there's this attitude on the left where people don't feel safe to ask, right? People don't feel safe to ask, right? It's this academic atmosphere where everyone's trying to show everyone else how smart they are, right? And everyone's trying to, and it's like where people feel like if they say, I don't know what that means, they say, what does neoliberal mean? Everyone's going to make fun of them, right? And it's this academic, like, I'm trying to prove I'm the smartest person around. It's not about proving you're the smartest person around. It's about actually getting things done, for goodness sake. It's about actually getting towards socialism. It's about actually accomplishing things. It's not about proving how smart you are, and we need to get to an atmosphere where people feel safe to ask, what does this word mean? That means, we need to get into that kind of situation where people feel safe saying, I don't know what reactionary means. I don't know what imperialism means. I don't know what contradiction means. And no one makes fun of them. They don't teach this in school. And when they teach it in school and in high universities, they teach it wrong anyway. And most schools, secondary education, they certainly don't teach this kind of thing. Right? We need to get an atmosphere in leftist circles where people actually want to learn the ideas. And it's not about people proving how smart they are to other people. It's a big problem. You go to the left forum. They canceled it this year because of coronavirus. But there's this atmosphere where everyone's trying to prove how much smarter they are than everybody else, and it's tragic. It's very tragic, and that needs to be overcome. And it's a problematic atmosphere. And the people who really understand leftist ideas, let me add, are self-educated, right? Let's be real. It's that you can't, the people who really want to know this stuff, they go out and they study it for themselves. And again, when I went to the bookstore when I was like a teenager and I wanted Marxist books, I found Noam Chomsky and I found like Capital by Marx. I couldn't make heads or tails of that. It took me years to find William Z. Foster, and the writings of William Z. Foster and his history of the three internationals and outlined political history of the Americas and Towards Soviet America and Twilight of World Capitalism, and these books that spell out their ideas very clearly. And those books I learned a huge amount from, right? And then based on reading those books and getting introductory understanding, I could then go and read Marx and Lenin and all these other things and understand what they meant because I had introductory knowledge. But there's this atmosphere where books like that are very hard to find. And they're very old, right? Books like that are from the 1930s, right? They don't print books like that now. You go to a left-wing publisher and give them a book that's written in clear everyday language. They won't publish it. It's not highfalutin enough, right? They want to publish something that every fan of Slavoj Žižek will be fighting over with every other fan of Slavoj Žižek. And that's an atmosphere that makes these ideas inaccessible to everyday people. I have been emphasizing over and over again, we need to get out of the movement and get to the masses. Out of the movement and get to the masses. This circle of leftists trying to prove how radical they are to each other, trying to impress each other with how radical they are, movementism, that needs to be gotten rid of. Right? We absolutely, positively need to create a situation where ordinary people understand that socialism is a way to make their life better and to make a better country, to make a better society for them. Community service, right? That is what is needed more than ever, right? We need leftism to be about community and caring for people when people are suffering, right? That's what we need. And I've talked about this in other lives, right? There needs to be an apparatus where people can feel safe and feel like, they can be part of all of this. And someone's talking about my personal life, and I do that. My personal life is not part of this, and I don't talk about my personal life on here. Occasionally I'll reminisce about something, but, I keep my personal life out of these things, and that's what you should do. I encourage people to do that, you know what I mean? Your personal life is your personal life. But, we need to build community. We need people to have a community of people centered around these ideas where they can feel safe and they can feel like they're not alone in this world. That's the worst thing about this pandemic is everyone's stuck in their houses feeling isolated, feeling alone, and seeing things happen and feeling like they have no power to do anything about it, feeling like they're completely alone, like there's no way that they can stop what's going on. The powers that be can just do whatever they want, and all they can do is just sit back and let it happen. That's the worst thing about this pandemic, is it leads to a sense of powerlessness where people are afraid. How does getting out of the movement and getting to the masses look? Well, I mean, imagine for a moment that in your neighborhood, right, when someone lost their job, there was a building that they could go to where they could get a free meal, they could get some help, and that building was run by communists. And that every week in your neighborhood, there was a weekly gathering where people would come together and sing songs and hear speeches about socialism, and that people in your neighborhood were going out and doing good things. They had free laundry days, for low-income folks. They had free, clothing drives for low-income mothers and kids, right? And they were doing it in the name of Marxism and socialism. And that they were giving classes on Marxism and giving speeches about Marxism. Imagine that in your neighborhood, whenever there was something going on that was an outrage, people would all go try to find the communists and ask them what they thought about it, right? That is what getting out of the movement and getting to the masses looks like. It's when there is sustainable organization on a community level that is meeting people's needs, giving people care and concern, and giving them ideology at the same time, giving them something to believe in. That's what it looks like. It's not in a protest cage. It's not. It's not just voting for the Democrats. It's not newspapers trying to be more revolutionary. It is functioning on a community level. It's functioning in neighborhoods. It's providing services to people. It's helping those in need, and it's teaching them ideology. Right? If you go to any other country in the world, people tell you about the communist neighborhoods. And in those communist neighborhoods, everyone knows that, the communists, they're in the neighborhood. They can get people out to their rallies. Everyone knows who the communist organizer is in their apartment building. People, he's knocking on your door once or twice a week just to see, not once or twice a week, but like once a month, you'll get a call from a communist organizer who wants to know how you're doing. It's like you read about the cell structure, the way the Communist Party functioned in the 30s, the way the Black Panthers functioned with their free breakfast program. I remember when I was living in Cleveland, there was an organization called Black on Black Crime Incorporated. It was a black nationalist organization. And they had T-shirts. Their symbol was like the shape of Africa. And it said Black on Black Crime Incorporated. It was a nonprofit dedicated to, promoting peace in the black community in Cleveland. But they had a meeting every Wednesday night, and they would have at least 80, 90 people there. And any problem in the community, police brutality, hospital closings, people would come to Black on Black Crime and talk about it. And the leader of it was a guy named Art McCoy. And he had run Superfly Barbershop, and he was a small business owner, and he was a black nationalist, and probably a socialist, basically. I mean, he wasn't a communist, but he was, he believed in socialism and caring for people. And, they would have their meeting once a week on the east side of Cleveland, and like 80 people would turn out. People would get up and talk about things. Anything happening in the neighborhood was important, and people, he was known, this guy, Art McCoy, was like kind of a local celebrity, and the news talked about him, and he had a radio program that was widely listened to in the black community. That's kind of what the communists were in the 1930s. Not exactly, you know what I mean? But it's when you have a community that is organized, when you have people that are centers of community struggles, when you have people that are dependable, right? When I was living in Cleveland, Dennis Kucinich was in office. And one thing that was very common was that if someone was going to lose their home, and this was 2008, 2009, the time of the financial crisis, a lot of people were losing their homes, they would call Dennis Kucinich's office. And Dennis would help them. And Dennis would call up the banks, and he could get your home loan renegotiated. Believe it or not, Dennis Kucinich, on kind of a community level, people could call his office. And he was able to stop people from losing their homes by putting pressure on banks and serving people in a community way. There were a lot of people that were very right-wing and conservative that voted for Dennis Kucinich because Dennis Kucinich took care of the neighborhood. And Dennis Kucinich was known for that. Dennis Kucinich was in Congress for how many years? Far left views. The guy running his office, I believe, one of the main organizers of his congressional office was a Communist Party USA member. Everybody knew that. Nobody cared. because Dennis was somebody who was kind of in the community, taking care of people, offering services. And he was loved for that. I remember that. I remember Dennis Kucinich. I was a college student who was a communist, and I sold communist newspapers. Dennis Kucinich knew me by name. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Right? It was weird. And I don't know if he would know me now. I probably wouldn't. But at the time, I was a college student with my newspapers, handing out communist newspapers. And he met me at like a Palestine event one time. And he met me another time at a parade. And the next time I saw him, he said, "Hey, you're Caleb, aren't you?" And he knew what school I went to. He knew what communist group I was in. That is an effective politician, right? And again, people lost their homes. I knew somebody who was losing their home. They called Dennis Kucinich's office, and Dennis helped him out, right? That kind of community organizing, that's the strength of the left, right? When socialists and communists are doing that, that's when they start to have real power. That's when they start to have real power. I'm just telling you, that's what it is. Is this moment a time to call for health care for all? Absolutely, right? And I made a video that coronavirus refutes this notion that healthcare is not a right. Absolutely, right? Why do we have a CDC? A Center for Disease Control. Why do we have that if healthcare is not a right, right? You're on your own. Why should the government protect you? The government should protect us from disease? Oh, okay. So the libertarians say, "Oh, no, healthcare is your business. You have no right to impose on it." Why do we have a CDC? Right? Why do we have quarantine, stay-at-home orders right now? Why are they banning public gatherings, right? The government shouldn't be protecting our health, right? Well, I guess it does. I guess the government does have the right to protect our health, right? There's just a question of how much, right? They shouldn't protect it in terms of making sure we're not in debt for the rest of our life because we go to the doctor. They shouldn't protect us in terms of making sure we're all insured, but they should protect us in making sure we don't get infected with the disease. That's the thing, right? We all agree that we need a CDC. We all agree that the government should be mobilizing to try and stop coronavirus. We all agree with that. It's just a matter of how much. And I think it should be extended. The government should be making sure no one's in debt because they get surgery that they need. The government should be making sure that everyone can go to a doctor when they're sick without fear. And health affects all of us. When one person in your society is ill, it has an effect on everyone. That's just a fact. That is just a reality. The health of one is the health of all, right? Human beings are collective creatures, and this belief that healthcare is a purely individual issue to be resolved by individuals. Bring a chicken to the doctor. You remember that one? Bring a chicken to the doctor, right? That was a congressional candidate for the Republicans in Nevada. Just, we don't need health insurance. Just bring a chicken to the doctor or paint their house, right? This is malarkey. It's absolute malarkey. We can get over this. We can get beyond this, right, as a society. And yes, this coronavirus situation is a moment where we need to get people to understand that everyone should have health care. And if somebody else doesn't have health care, it affects you. If people are afraid to go to the doctor when they're sick, they might stay sick and infect you, right? Why aren't the tests available? The tests should have been immediately available. They should have been universally testing everyone. Goodness gracious, folks. Goodness gracious. The Internationale is a great song. I saw someone asking about it. It comes from the French Paris Commune. Originally, it was to the tune of the Marseillaise, but then they changed it to have its own tune. Eugène Portier. The words in the original French are very poetic. It's the theme song of international communism. I'm not going to sing it for you all, but it's a good song. I like it. The Paris Commune, the Internationale. It's good stuff. Part of leftist culture. Yeah, there you go, folks. Now, I'm probably going to wrap up pretty soon, but we've been going quite a long time here. But if you want to ask me anything, you want to do a final super chat, ask me a question, now is the time. Now or never. Speak now or forever hold your peace, or just until the next time. So there you go. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Final questions, final super chats. Happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Nathaniel says he thinks social media exposes the plight of the poor, and I think he's right about that. Not that social media isn't controlled. It certainly is, right? There's a high amount of control of social media. Certain things go viral, certain things don't. News curators, as we've heard about Facebook and whatnot. What a day, folks. What a day. Another day working from home, another day in this nightmare. This pandemic is a nightmare. I want society to come back to normal. I want to socialize with people. I want to see other people. I want to go to events. This is a nightmare. And it's a nightmare for all of us. I know most of you are probably in the same boat. It's a nightmare. Opinions about Paul Cockshott on cybercommunism. You know, Max, I bought Paul Cockshott's book, The New Communism. I think it's called like The New Communism or something like that. I bought it. I haven't had the opportunity to just sit down and dig into it. And now that I'm at home, that's one thing I can do. I probably should do it. It's sitting on my bookshelf right now. I ordered it after seeing people talk about it in the lives. I'd not heard of Paul Cockshott before, but I know he's on social media and he's written a lot. And he's a Marxist-Leninist. He's from Britain, I believe, Scottish. And I actually, I'd like to dig into what he has to say. When you talk about cyber communism, the one thing that's interesting is that there is a weird trend, and this is an interesting trend, right? And this is particularly relevant during this coronavirus situation. When you go on Facebook and you post a status, you post a picture, you're making money for Mark Zuckerberg. He's making a profit off of it. But you're not working. That's playing. You're making money by playing. You're not paying him to play, though. He makes advertising revenue off of you. You know what I'm saying? And that's particularly interesting. And that's starting to approach the potential of communism, right? Because under communism, people just do what they feel like doing and take what they need, right? And if you can start making revenue for Facebook by just doing what you feel like doing, that's starting to approach, you're not working and you're not buying a product, right? But you're creating value. You're creating value. And that's starting to approach something like that. And that shows, I really like the work of Nelson Peary. Nelson Peary has a very good book called The Future is Up to Us, which is about, communism and socialism. I think it came out in like 2004. And it gets into the economics of it, the understanding of what communism is. And, he talks about artificial intelligence. I mean, he doesn't even mention it, right, in the book, but he's talking about cybernation and robotics and he's talking about the basis of the economics of communism, not socialism, but communism, right? And it's very important to think about, right? And he points out that one of the weird things about the Soviet Union was it had the same mode of production as the Western capitalist countries, right? And that every higher stage of civilization, every higher economic stage comes with a higher mode of production. But the socialism that we've seen has had capitalist industrial production just reorganized in a socialist planned way, but that the actual victory of socialism will come with a higher mode of production, and that computers are kind of taking us to a higher mode of production. And that's an interesting discussion. There's a lot there, right? Because why could socialism not ultimately defeat Western capitalism? Because it was on the same mode of production, right? But if a higher mode of production comes into existence, right? Feudalism was overthrown by a higher mode of production. Feudalism was subsistence farming. It was overthrown by factory and industrial production, right? That's just a fact, right? That hunter-gatherer civilization was hunting and gathering, and it was overthrown by farming and agriculture, right? A higher mode of production. And that to really successfully overturn an old system, you need a higher mode of production. During the times of feudalism, there were often peasant revolts and peasant uprisings that would happen, where the peasants would rise up, and sometimes you had peasant communes that were like egalitarian socialist communes of peasants in Europe, in Germany, and elsewhere. The peasants would rise up, and maybe for 100 years they would overthrow the landlord, they would own the lands in common, but eventually feudalism would retake it, because feudalism is a more effective way, and they didn't have a higher mode of production. Feudalism wasn't fundamentally uprooted until a higher mode of production came into existence, and that are computers moving us toward a higher mode of production beyond industrial production? And will that higher mode of production rip capitalism apart, just like industrial production ripped apart feudalism, and lay the basis for the new system? And I think that Nelson Peary is really on point about that. And that's, the fact that the Soviet Union had the same mode of production. It was simply the capitalist mode of production of industry reorganized in a socialist manner may have shown that it wasn't, fundamentally strong enough to defeat capitalism. And computers and the computer revolution may be laying the basis for something exciting. Now, the fact that the computer revolution can be tied to China and can be tied to the various socialist economies of the world may also be an advantage. I'm just talking here. We don't know about all of this. We can't predict the future, right? This is it's one thing to talk about the history of the Soviet Union and all of that. When you're talking about this stuff, this is all hypothetical. But Facebook is interesting. Used to be, you wanted to have fun, you paid to have fun, and the capitalists made a profit from you paying to have fun. Or you wanted to make money, you went to work, and the capitalists made money from your labor, and you got wages in exchange. But social media is neither of those things. In social media, you're playing. You're doing what you would be doing. And thank you, Herb, for the super chat. I do appreciate it. You're doing what you would be doing, right? You're just doing what you would be doing, and revenue and value is being created from what you're doing, right? You're generating revenue, right? It's interesting. It's very, very interesting. Now, maybe you could argue with TV, right? You turn on your TV, you're making advertising revenue for advertisers. But Facebook's a little bit different because you're making the content. TV, you just watch. But with Facebook, you're making the content. Your life is on there. You're generating content. You're doing labor. You're not just sitting there watching TV. You're not being entertained. You're involved in labor that generates revenue, but you're playing. You're doing it voluntarily. You're not getting a wage in exchange, and you're not paying to do it. I think that's fascinating, and it points to some of this stuff. So, folks, we've been going on here for quite some time. I hope everyone is having a good night and a good evening. We need a government of action to fight for working families right now. More than ever, we need a government of action to fight for working families. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of reaction. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. No, I missed something there. Let's start once again. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thanks, folks.